That afternoon, Asheville was draped in cold rain, tiny droplets sliding down my hands as I stood at my son's gate. I carried a porcelain box, the birthday gift for my granddaughter. All I pictured was her throwing her arms around me like always, but as I neared the window, the laughter from inside made me freeze. It wasn't a child's laugh, it was my husband's. Through the slit in the curtain, I saw him on the sofa, pressed close to my daughter-in-law. Her head rested on his shoulder, her fingers tracing little circles on his collar like they were a pair of secret lovers. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, and I only caught my daughter-in-law's voice, sweet but cold. "If you file for irreconcilable differences, we'll get at least half." And her old house. "Let me handle improvements reimbursement." My husband chuckled, stroked her hair, and answered like he'd just signed my sentence. "Linda never suspects a thing. She spent her whole life trusting people." I stood on the porch, stunned, hearing my heart crack under the rain. The box slipped from my hands, the lid shattered, the ring of porcelain on tile like a death knell for 40 years of marriage. I didn't knock. I pulled out my phone, hit record, took a long breath, and thought, they've shown their hand, now it's my turn to set the board. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I stayed in the rain for a long while, my hands still shaking, whether from the cold or the truth that had just stabbed straight into my chest. I couldn't tell. The living room light kept spilling warm gold outside, where the two people I loved most were whispering how to take me down. I backed out of the yard, careful not to make a sound. Mud swallowed my shoes, my right one soaked through, but I felt nothing except emptiness. Back in the car, I sat in the dark with my hands on the wheel. Every sound seemed to die out, leaving only the cold wind through the frame and my heartbeat like a drum. I replayed the recording. Kelsey's voice, my daughter-in-law, rang clear through the speaker. "She'll never suspect." Each word was a small knife, lodging deep in my memory. I looked into the rearview mirror and saw my own face. A 66-year-old woman, gray-streaked hair, lined skin, tired eyes. A retired teacher who had spent a lifetime teaching students about honesty, trust, and decency, never imagining I'd be betrayed inside the very home I built. I inhaled deeply, pulled up my phone, and saved the recording. Then I opened my notes app and typed the first line, March 7th, 5:42 p.m. Asheville. Victor present at Jason's house, present with Kelsey. Divorce papers on the table. Conversation indicates they are planning to seize assets. I typed each word slowly and firmly, like grading an ethics paper gone wrong. Driving off that little street, I kept my speed steady so no one inside would notice. I knew I couldn't act on emotion. They know the law, and they had surely anticipated my reaction. I had to stay one step ahead. When I got home, our house at the end of the lane by the pines, where Victor and I had lived nearly 40 years, his truck was where it always was, by the garage. Now I finally understood why, for months, he'd said, busy at the shop, tough clients, working late, all lies. I walked in. The diffuser still carried a faint lavender scent I always turned on at night. The quiet felt too heavy. The morning paper he'd left lay on the dining table, a huge headline. High-profile divorce in Charlotte, wife loses everything. I let out a small laugh. How ironic that I was living that very story. I made myself a cup of black tea, set my phone on the table, and began recording a memo to myself. It's 7 p.m. I, Linda Carver, am documenting what I saw and heard. If anything happens to me, this will be the first piece of evidence. Victor and Kelsey are planning a sham divorce to seize assets. I have audio, time, and location. This will not be the last entry. I saved the file and named it Evidence 01. The tea cooled, but my head felt clearer than ever. I took out my old brown-covered notebook I used for lesson plans and wrote a title in blue ink, Counterplan. I split the page into 4 columns. Evidence. Money trail. Timeline. Action plan. I started listing each point in detail. 1. Victor lied about being at the shop all day. 2. His truck appeared at Jason's house at 5:30 p.m. 3. Kelsey had divorce documents. 4. They discussed improvement reimbursement and asset division. I wrote until my hand ached, but each line made me feel a little stronger. On the table, an old family photo stared back, Victor beaming next to Jason on our trip to Maine, me holding Lily. I brushed my fingers against the frame. That photo used to prove love and family. Now it was just a reminder of my own naivety. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up along with my trust. I knew I couldn't let emotions lead. I had to go back to who I was on the podium, rational, steady, methodical. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank. Something was off. Lots of small withdrawals, hundreds here and there, spaced out every few days, something I'd never noticed before. I printed every statement, slipped them into a plastic sleeve, and labeled it Suspicious Finances. Then I changed passwords on every account: bank, email, insurance, even social media. I disabled location sharing, then turned on two-factor authentication. That night when Victor came home, I pretended everything was normal. He opened the door, shook the rain off his coat, and said, "Rained all day. I was at the shop the whole time. The customer gave me a headache." I smiled and didn't answer. In my head, I logged it as a new entry. Repeated lie, 9:12 p.m., March 7th. He asked why I wasn't in bed yet. I said, "Waiting to have tea with you." I poured him tea, watched the steam rise, and wondered how many years I'd lived with a stranger I thought was my soulmate. After he went to shower, I opened my voice memos again and added, "Victor came home at 9:10. Feigned fatigue. Wouldn't look me in the eye." The "at the shop" story repeated. I saved the second file, evidence 02. Before bed, I opened the notebook again and wrote the day's final line: no confrontation, no display of emotion, collect, record, calculate, counter. I set the pen down, closed the notebook, and looked out at the fogged window. The rain hadn't stopped, but inside me, something else had begun, not a storm of tears, but a plan born from pain and the mind of a woman who taught ethics and justice her whole life. The next day, I would start where I'm strongest: patience and discipline. They think I'm just a gentle old woman? They'll learn the first lesson soon. No one plays chess like a woman who spent 40 years in silence. The next morning, when Victor left, I stood at the window watching him go. Brown leather jacket, shoes polished to a shine, things he never cared about before. After 4 decades together, I knew he once used the cheapest soap and hated cologne. Yet now, the bedroom still carried a new scent. An expensive men's fragrance, a little sharp and heady, like what I've smelled at Macy's around Christmas. I went to the dresser and saw a small cologne bottle among his vitamins, the label brand new. "A gift from whom, Victor?" I whispered, but didn't wait for an answer. I noticed every small detail, the things I used to overlook because I trusted him. His shirts were now always crisply ironed, even with a crease down the sleeve, something he never did, since his shop is all grease and oil. He said he wanted to look sharper to keep up appearances with clients. I just nodded, but in my head I wrote, March 8th. Sign: change in wardrobe habits, reason not credible. At noon, I called the shop to confirm. The foreman, Jimmy, sounded surprised on the line. "He already left early, ma'am. Said he had personal stuff to handle." "Personal?" I repeated, keeping my voice even. "Any idea what it was?" "Not really. Just said he'd be back later." I thanked him, hung up, and sat still. Victor almost never used to leave mid-shift. He used to brag, "If the crew doesn't take a break, neither does the boss." That line now sounded like a joke. By afternoon, I didn't go straight home after tutoring. Instinct pushed me to swing by my son's neighborhood. Maplewood was quiet as always, maples casting shadows on the stone-paved walk. As I turned the corner, my heart stopped. Victor's gray pickup sat neatly in front of Jason's garage. I killed the engine, parked 2 houses down, and reclined the seat so no one would see me. Through the misted glass, I saw them. Kelsey stood on the porch, blonde hair spilling over her shoulders. Victor stood close enough that their breath could have mingled. She tilted her head up, said something that made him smile, the smile I hadn't seen on him when he looked at me in a long time. Then Kelsey reached up, adjusted his collar, her fingers sliding slowly across his shoulder, then down his chest, intimate. No words needed, no more proof required. I understood. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and snapped a few quick shots. Each one was a stab, but my hand stayed steady. I noted the time, 4:47 p.m. License plate, NC 237FK. I saved everything in a folder labeled Proof. Just as I went to start the car, the house next door opened. Jason's neighbor, Mrs. Collins, stepped out in a blue knit coat, mail in hand. She spotted me and gave a little wave. I lowered the window and tried to smile like usual. "Oh, Linda, didn't know you were dropping by today." "Yes, just bringing a little treat for Lily." She smiled, then lowered her voice like sharing a secret. "Well, Victor's here a lot. I figured you two were moving to be closer to your son." I kept my face neutral, but my hand tightened on the wheel. "Yes, maybe he's helping Jason with repairs." "That's nice, but you know, they seem very close, like a truly tight father-son pair." I only nodded, then quickly excused myself. As I drove off, her words echoed, "Victor's here often." That night when he came home, I set dinner like always, roast and mashed potatoes. He talked about busy days at the shop and grumbled about picky clients. I smiled and quietly served him another slice. Inside, I added a new line. Lie continues, 8:17 p.m. After he fell asleep, I gathered his laundry. In his coat pocket, I found a motel receipt. Green Valley Motel, Asheville downtown, dated last week. Time, from 1:20 p.m. to 5:10 p.m. I sat on the bed, hands trembling as I stared at the bold print, Room 214 paid in cash. There's no explanation that could excuse that. I tucked the receipt into an envelope, wrote the date, and hid it in the secret drawer of my desk. The papers were stacking up tiny pieces of evidence, but I knew each fragment would soon form the full picture. 2 days later, after Victor left, I pulled up our bank statements again. A pattern jumped out. Small withdrawals, only about $100 to $200 at the same ATM, less than a mile from Jason's house. Over the past 2 months, more than 10 such transactions. I printed the statements and marked each line in red pen. Every time I looked at the numbers, anger rose, not about the money, but the contempt. In the late afternoon, I sat by the window, sunset washing gold over the old wood floor. I glanced at the wedding photo on the wall, Victor in a black tuxedo, me in a puff-sleeved white dress. Back then he told me, "I'll never give you a reason to doubt me." I smiled faintly, a smile drained of feeling. I opened my phone and pulled up the photo folder. Porch snapshots, the motel receipt, statements, everything carefully filed. I named the folder Silent Storm. Each night I opened it and dropped in another piece, like a craftswoman patiently stitching each thread into the great fabric of truth. I knew I couldn't unload this pain on anyone else, not yet. Jason couldn't know. My son was buried in work and blind faith in the woman he loved, and I certainly couldn't let Kelsey realize I was awake now. She's a lawyer, sharp and calculating. One mistake, and I'd lose my chance to strike back. I pressed it all down, no crying, no shouting. Only the silence of someone who has lived long enough to know tears are a luxury, while composure is a weapon. Before bed, I pulled out a portable hard drive, backed everything up to the cloud, and set a new password. I also sent a copy of the folder to a backup email only I knew. Each small step felt like building a fortress around myself. Finally, I sat at my desk and wrote the 3 people I could trust. First, Daniel Whitaker, the lawyer who helped a friend get a fair divorce even though her husband was a big businessman. Second, Martha Hale, the accountant friend from my teaching days, practical and discreet. And last, Joan Reed, my former principal, who once told me something I never forgot. Sometimes, silence is the biggest lesson of all. I wrote their names down and gently closed the notebook. Outside, rain began again, whispering like someone reading out the errors of the past. I shut my eyes, listened to the rain blend with the tick of the clock, and knew that from now on, each passing day would be a new stitch cinching up the net of truth, and I, the woman they thought was old and naive, was quietly pulling the first threads. 3 days later, after Victor left for work, I grabbed my bag and slipped in every receipt, photo, and my notebook. I dressed plainly like always, but I knew, today, I wasn't the gentle, silent wife anymore. I was an investigator investigating my own marriage. Blue Ridge Community Bank sits downtown, where Victor and I opened a joint account more than 20 years ago. The teller I knew, Megan, greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Carver. How can I help you today?" I smiled back and set my ID on the counter. "I'd like full statements for the past 6 months on all accounts under my name and my husband's, plus any related transfers." Megan hesitated a beat. "Would you like paper or electronic copies, ma'am?" "Both. And I'll need them today." I saw her surprise, but she didn't pry. 15 minutes later, she brought over a thick stack. I sat at the waiting table, opened each page, and lightly penciled the odd transactions. Over 6 months, there were 24 small cash withdrawals, ranging from $100 to $400, totaling $7,800. They appeared almost weekly, mostly at the same ATM, the one on the corner near Jason's. I held the statement, a chill creeping up my wrists. I turned the page, Victor's secondary credit card. Transactions matched the timing. Le Chandelier Bistro, Hearth and Home Furniture, and Auburn Gifts, high-end spots I'd never set foot in, but I knew who had. I noted carefully, February 3rd, Le Chandelier Bistro, $248, dinner for 2. February 10th, Hearth and Home, $1,245, gray silk sofa. February 17th, Auburn Gifts, $389, crystal photo frame. I sat there over an hour, linking the timeline to Victor's late at the shop nights. Everything lined up a kind of perfection that made it hard to breathe. When I left the bank, the sun had begun to break through. Light filtered across the glass, making the statement shimmer like a mirror, reflecting a woman holding a map of her husband's sins. Back home, I brewed a pot of black coffee, opened my laptop, and entered everything into a spreadsheet. Date, amount, location, notes, flag. Line by line, the tiny text on the screen turned into a portrait of betrayal without a single confession. At 1 p.m., I called Martha Hale, my old friend, who once handled accounting for a law firm. Her voice was steady and warm as ever. "Linda? Long time. So, this is about money, isn't it?" I hesitated a few seconds, then told the truth. "Martha, I think Victor is hiding money, and I need to protect my share without tipping him off." Silence for a few beats. Then Martha spoke softly but firmly. "First, don't withdraw anything. Leave it as is. Let the trail stay clear. But open a new account in only your name at a different bank. And print every document, more is better." I did that this morning. "Good. And the house? That place was yours before marriage, right?" "Yes. I bought it with my mother's inheritance before the wedding." "Perfect. Then no one touches it if the deed stays solely in your name. Check the file, make sure there was no retitling into marital property." After the call, I went to my office, opened the safe, and pulled the deed. The line still read, "Linda May Carver sole owner." I took photos, printed 2 copies, one for a folder labeled "Separate Property," one for my backup safe deposit box. While I was sorting papers, my phone pinged transaction alert. Victor just spent $1,700 at Riley's Jewelers. I didn't have to guess who the gift was for. I opened my inbox and hit print. Sheet after sheet slid out, each one evidence that couldn't be denied. I marked each page and arranged them by date. Every whir of the printer made the room feel heavier. By late afternoon, I stared at the pines behind the house, shifting color in the fading light. I remembered Victor standing out there cutting grass, wiping down the truck, smiling at me from a distance. Now it was only the hollow outline of a man I'd once trusted with my life. I closed the file, took a deep breath, and headed to Best Buy at the mall. I bought a Sony mini voice recorder, lighter size, clips to a pocket. I picked up extra memory cards and spare batteries. When the clerk asked, "Using it for lectures?" I smiled slightly. "No, to record the truth." On the way home, I pulled over, took out my notebook, and wrote, March 10th. Bought mini recorder. Purpose: collect audio evidence. Plan to use during a test conversation with Kelsey. I already had a plan to approach her not with rage, but with a mind game. A teacher who spent a lifetime on words would now use words to probe the one who betrayed her. That night, Victor came home late. He said traffic because of rain. I glanced at the clock, 9:30 p.m. His eyes slid away when I asked if he wanted dinner. He shook his head, said he'd eaten with a client. I only answered with a short, "Okay," then cleared the table. In my mind, the timestamps lined up like a spreadsheet ready to run. After he fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The house was so quiet I could hear the rain tapping the roof. I opened the laptop and added the day's final line. March 10th, Riley's Jewelers, $1,700, Victor's card. Conclusion: withdrawals and spending outside the marriage. I shut the laptop and leaned back. Part of me wanted to scream and confront him right then, but the rational part, the one I honed over 40 years of teaching, said something else. Don't rush. They're strong with words, but weak against evidence. And evidence, you have it. I looked up at the wall clock, the minute hand crawled, patient as I am now. The next day, I drafted my script to probe Kelsey. I'd swing by my sons with an excuse, bringing cookies. For Lily, and casually, share how a friend suspects her husband is cheating, then ask my daughter-in-law, a lawyer, a woman who's seen every divorce, for advice. She wouldn't suspect a thing. I still played the doting, naive mother perfectly. I wrote each innocent question. 1. If a husband hides money from his wife, what can the wife do? 2. What if the asset is a premarital house? 3. Is there a way to prove he used marital funds for personal purposes? I reread and tweaked every word, like prepping for the last lecture of my life, a lecture for myself. When I finished, I folded the paper and tucked it inside my brown notebook. In my head, everything was finally in order. I wasn't out for revenge. I was reclaiming the truth. And in a world full of lies, I knew only money doesn't lie. I turned off the lamp and looked out the window. The rain had stopped, yellow light pooled on the wet pavement. In the glass, my eyes no longer trembled. Maybe, for the first time in years, I saw the woman I used to be, a woman who can look straight at the truth, no matter how cruel it is. I used to think things like the cloud, GPS tracking, or anonymous email were just for kids. I taught grammar for 40 years and never needed to know how a phone worked beyond calling and texting. But now that my life had turned into an unofficial investigation, I knew I had to relearn it all, and this time, the syllabus was my survival. The first person I thought of was Noah, the 16-year-old next door, the Hendersons' son. Smart kid, he'd helped me reset the Wi-Fi a few months back. I waited until afternoon, saw him washing the car in the driveway, and called over. Noah, do you have a minute? I need help with some tech stuff. He looked up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and grinned. Of course, Miss Linda. I know you're the most dedicated student on the block. We sat on my porch. I laid out my phone, laptop, and the new mini recorder on the table. I want to learn how to record discreetly, store data safely in the cloud, and track a specific item like Find My iPhone, but for keys. Noah's eyes widened, amused. Are you doing a project? I smiled. Yes, a project about honesty. He laughed and didn't pry. For 2 hours I learned how to set up an AirTag, sync it with my iPhone, and hide the app so no one would spot it. Noah also showed me how to set alerts if the tracked item moved outside a safe zone. I tested hiding the AirTag on Victor's keyring, the birthday gift he'd bragged about, because it's engraved with my name. I took a photo and tagged the first location. Garage 5:52 p.m. He also showed me how to create a private folder in iCloud that only I could access. Use a password with letters, numbers, and symbols. Don't use birthdays or family names, Noah said. I nodded and wrote in my notebook like I was taking dictation. Don't let anyone guess I know. Before he left, Noah installed a movement tracking app linked to the AirTag and said, Now, if the keys go anywhere, you'll know. Even when you're not home. I thanked him, handed over some fresh-baked cookies, and joked, I'll never mark you down if you forget your homework. That night, I started testing the recorder. I clipped the tiny device inside my cardigan sleeve, then talked normally to myself to check the audio. After that, I tried it in my purse, in a water bottle, even tucked between books on the shelf. Each playback, I adjusted levels and found the clearest spots. It felt like lesson planning, except this time, I wasn't teaching students. I was teaching myself how to survive in a world of liars. When I felt confident, I opened my laptop and created a secret email address. No real name, no profile photo. I chose Old Bookshelf 89, my way of reminding myself I was still the bookish old teacher, not a detective in my own life. I uploaded everything there, audio files, photos, statements, receipt images. I also backed up my entire iMessage thread with Victor. Some texts looked harmless at first, but reading them again, I saw the layers of coldness dressed up as politeness. I'm busy tonight. Sleeping at the shop. Don't wait up for dinner. Those aren't a husband's texts. They're a man splitting his time between two separate lives. For 3 nights straight, I tracked the AirTag data. Victor's schedule was almost down to the minute. 7 a.m. Out the door, 8 a.m. At the shop, noon leaving, 12:20 p.m., arriving in Jason's neighborhood, and back downtown at 5 p.m. One morning I printed the movement map and stared at the blinking blue dots like footprints of betrayal on the screen. I taped that map to the wall beneath a line. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be seen. On day 6, I decided to stage a Lily's birthday plan so I'd have a legitimate reason to be at Kelsey's house. I texted Jason, I want to bring cookies and start decorating for Lily's birthday. Is this weekend okay? Jason replied fast, Of course, Mom. Kelsey said she's getting a gift for her too. I smiled. Everything was set. I'd arrive early with the recorder and a gift bag with a small pin cam clipped inside a brooch. I wasn't aiming to catch them in the act, but to capture how they looked at each other, how they spoke, how they performed the role of a perfect family. While prepping, I bought a doorbell camera with online storage. I told Victor I wanted more security because I heard about break-ins nearby. He agreed right away, not suspecting I needed a reason to see who came and went from my house each day. That evening, I installed the camera and checked the angle. Anytime Victor came home late, I could see him through the app. I studied his patterns, often sitting in the car for a few minutes, as if rehearsing the lie in his head. One night, I watched him wipe his collar with a tissue before coming inside. I zoomed in. There was a faint lipstick mark, bright red. I saved that clip and time-stamped it. What I felt now wasn't pain, it was cold clarity. Everything in my marriage fell into two buckets: data and target. If I let feelings in, I'd lose. If I stayed logical, I could force them to face their own consequences. Once I had enough, I drafted my first summary. Each line short and precise, like a case brief, 24 small cash withdrawals totaling $7,800. Restaurant, furniture, and jewelry receipts matching Victor's absences. AirTag pings matching Jason's address 4 days a week. Motel receipt and images of intimate interactions with Kelsey. Using the anonymous email, I sent the files to attorney Daniel Whitaker, Martha's contact I'd never met, only told he was principled and does not tolerate crooked lawyers. I wrote the subject, Case, Marital Asset Fraud Request Confidential Assessment. In the body, I kept it brief. I am a wife suspected of being deceived and having assets diverted. This is the initial data set. Please confirm receipt and protect my identity. When I hit send, my heart thumped once, then settled. No one knew what I'd just done. Victor was still asleep on the sofa with the news on. I looked at him, the man I once loved, now just a figure in my counterplan. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stepped onto the porch. Asheville's night was quiet wind through the pines, warm lamplight on wet brick. In the dark, I didn't feel like a betrayed wife anymore. I felt like an older student who just passed her first exam in the digital age. I'd learned that technology isn't only for the young. It's the new language of truth, and once a teacher learns that language, no liar can outsmart her. Saturday morning, Asheville was clear as glass. I slipped a box of chocolate chip cookies into a tote and checked the mini recorder hidden under the napkin lining. The tiny red light blinked. Everything was ready. I looked in the mirror, fixed my hair, and smiled, not the smile of a victor, but of someone who has learned to hide her feelings. I got to Jason's right at noon. Kelsey opened the door, still pretty, makeup light but polished. She hesitated a beat when she saw me, then gave a polite smile. "Oh, you're early." Jason just ran out to grab a few things for lunch. "That's fine. I just brought some cookies for Lily. She loves these." I walked in, keeping my manner easy. The house still smelled like vanilla candles, soft music playing from the speakers. I noticed it right away. The living room sofa wasn't the old one. It was a gray velvet set, identical to the furniture receipt I'd seen on the statement. I brushed the edge and smiled. "Beautiful sofa. New?" Yeah, a designer friend gave me a discount," she answered a little too quickly. I sat, set the cookie box on the table, and began, "I've noticed Victor's been different lately." Kelsey tilted her head, her face shifting to practiced concern. "Different how?" "Home late more often. Says he's at the shop all evening, but he smells like cologne and his shirts are crisply ironed. Do you think it's normal for a 61-year-old man to change like that?" She gave a small, sympathetic smile. "Maybe he just wants to refresh himself. Men get scared of aging sometimes, so they pay more attention to how they look." I looked straight at her, calm. "Maybe, but if a friend of mine suspects her husband is cheating and the other person is a relative by marriage, what would a lawyer advise her to do?" Kelsey froze briefly, picked up her phone, fingers flying, probably a text. She replied in a more professional tone, "Well, first she needs evidence, you know that. Then prep for asset division. If there's a house, land, or joint accounts, she should lock it all down. And if the husband tries to move money, the wife can ask the court to freeze assets." I nodded, attentive. "What about a separate house? Say a premarital property?" She arched a brow, clearly interested in the legal angle. "Technically separate property isn't split, but if there were upgrades, renovations, improvements during the marriage, and joint contributions can be proven, the other side can still claim reimbursement. Depends on how good the lawyer is." She sounded so confident, I could almost hear the arrogance. I feigned confusion. Wow, complicated. So if the husband has a strong lawyer, the wife could lose a lot? Kelsey smirked slightly. Not necessarily. What matters is who prepares first. If you plan it well, the person who understands the law won't lose anything. That line hit the quiet room like a pebble thrown onto a still lake. I felt every word, "won't lose anything." It wasn't advice, it was the manifesto of someone practicing it. I still remember that moment, her confident smile, me just listening, steady as a lake. Not because I was weak, but because I already knew. Wind can blow words away, but it can't blow away evidence. What do you think about that moment? Is silence the strongest form of payback? Tell me in the comments, I truly want to know what you'd choose. I chuckled lightly, easy as small talk. Sounds like you've handled a lot of these cases, huh? She laughed softly, shrugged. Oh, it's the job. At my firm, divorces over assets happen all the time. I glanced down at the phone in my purse. The recording light was still on. Everything was being captured, every word. Right then, Lily burst out of her room, pigtails bouncing, clutching a plastic doll. She squealed, "Grandma, you're here." I opened my arms and kissed her forehead. The warmth softened me, but her next line cut cold. "Grandpa came yesterday when Dad was at work. Mom said he was fixing the cabinet." The room went silent. I kept smiling, smoothing her hair. "Really? Grandpa's very handy." Kelsey hurried up to gather cups, flustered. "She's just chatting, Mom." Victor only stopped by to say hello. I looked at her, expression unchanged. Kids remember well. Sometimes better and more honestly than adults. The air grew heavy. I stood and glanced at my watch. I should get dinner started. I'll catch Jason another time. Kelsey nodded, voice stiff. Okay. Drive safe. I bent to kiss Lily again, keeping my voice warm. Keep Grandma's secret, okay? I'll bring cake next time. She giggled, oblivious to the storm gathering around her. Out at the car, my hands trembled slightly. I shut the door and took a long breath. My heart pounded, but I knew I couldn't let emotion win. I saved the recording. Length, 42 minutes. Clear audio. I played a few clips. Kelsey's steady professional tone, punctuated by her soft laugh. If joint improvements can be proven, the other side can claim a share. What matters is who prepares first. Won't lose anything. Those 3 lines, just 3, sketched the entire picture. I drove slowly down Maplewood, sunlight filtering through the leaves. In the rear view, I saw my reflection calm, but with something resolute in my eyes. The anger had settled, replaced by cold focus. I was no longer the one being fooled. I was becoming the one who keeps the record. At home, I unpacked, plugged the recorder into my laptop. The audio file appeared, waveforms neat and even. I renamed it Kelsey Interview 1, then filed it into Silent Storm. I sent a copy to Daniel Whitaker's anonymous intake email with a note, audio of discussion between female subject K and me, March 16th, duration 42 minutes. Content indicates intent to seize assets via improvements reimbursement. Please confirm confidentiality. I hit send and watched the screen. Mail sent successfully popped up, tiny words with enormous weight. That night, Victor came home late, said there was a new client, needed negotiating. I nodded, pretended to be tired, and went upstairs first. Once the door closed, I opened my phone to the location app. The blue dot, the AirTag on his keys, was parked at the address I knew by heart, Jason's house. I smiled softly, not out of pain, but because I realized their secrets were now telling on themselves through the data. I didn't even need to ask. I opened my notebook and wrote one short line. Today, March 16th. Successful recording. Kelsey confirms legal knowledge and financial motive. Lily provides supporting detail. Collection phase nearly complete. I closed the notebook and set the pen down. Outside, a thin crescent moon hung low, silver light slipping through the curtains onto the spread of papers, evidence, maps, receipts, statements, all weaving the betrayal they themselves had authored. And I, the woman once dismissed as weak, was writing its ending with planned silence. I never thought I'd walk into a law office not to sign a contract or notarize a form, but to plan a counterattack against my own husband and daughter-in-law. But that morning, as Asheville's sun touched the tall panes of Whitaker and Associates, I knew there was no turning back. Daniel Whitaker's office was on the 4th floor, neat and bright, the smell of coffee mixing with new paper. He was in his 50s, tall, with silvering hair and gray eyes sharp enough to read my story before I spoke. When I set the thick folder on his desk, he nodded slightly and said, "Steady. Martha gave me a heads up. But I have to say, you've done a professional investigator's job. Your filing system is problem, something I could learn from." I gave a dry smile. "I'm only doing what I need to protect myself, Mr. Whitaker." He went sheet by sheet, statements, photos, audio, even the AirTag route maps I'd printed. Each time he nodded, a bit of weight lifted, not for the praise, but because I wasn't carrying this alone anymore. After nearly 20 minutes, he set his glasses down and looked at me. "First, we need to temporarily freeze the joint accounts. Based on this evidence, I can file for an emergency freeze due to suspected misuse of marital assets. Once frozen, all transactions stop immediately." I nodded. "I want that done as soon as possible. We'll do it Monday at 8:30 a.m. I'll draft the papers this afternoon, you just sign." He poured more coffee, voice even but careful. "As for Kelsey, this part is delicate. She's an attorney, which means ethical obligations. If you provide sufficient proof that she exploited family information for personal gain, I can file an ethics complaint with the state bar. That won't just ruin her reputation, she could be suspended." I tightened my grip on the cup, eyes on the desk. "I don't want to destroy anyone, but she destroyed my family." "I understand," he said slowly. "So we'll run 2 tracks. Plan A, reconciliation. You confront them in a family meeting, present the evidence, and give them the option to sign a quiet separation agreement. Plan B, if they push back, I file immediately. You have evidence, a potential witness, and legal grounds. They won't have room to maneuver." I was quiet for a few seconds, then asked, "Which do you think they'll choose?" "Smart people choose silence. Arrogant people choose a fight. From what you've described, they'll fight. That's better for us. Angry people confess for free." We mapped the steps. He wrote briskly. 1. Monday, 8:30 a.m. Freeze all joint accounts. 2. Monday, 9:15. Notify the bank and the insurance company. 3. Same day, 2 p.m. You'll sign a formal retainer so I can represent you. 4. Tuesday, prep the ethics complaint against Kelsey. 5. Wednesday, send the family meeting invitation, our trigger point. When he capped his pen, I looked at the strong handwriting, each line nailing down the plan to win my fairness back. Before I left, he said, "I'll need Martha to verify any home improvements they might claim. Have her audit receipts, materials, and actual timeline so we can counter precisely." That afternoon, I went to Martha's. Her small house was as tidy as ever, cinnamon in the air. After I laid it out, she nodded firmly. "They want to say renovations? I'll show them what real books look like. If it was paid with your separate funds, I can prove every cent." She opened her laptop and a spreadsheet. "How far back do you keep receipts?" "Since 2001. All in the file cabinet." Martha laughed and patted my hand. "Then this is easy. No one beats a teacher who keeps her paperwork. We reviewed every item: paint, roof repair, hardwood flooring. Most were charged to my individual card." Her fingers tapped, then she said, "Done. I'll write a detailed valuation memo for the attorney. And for the house value, hire an independent appraiser so they can't claim appreciation came from joint effort." That night, I came home, pulled the old property files. The deed still read, Linda May Carver Soleil ownership. Next to it, a 2019 appraisal. I snapped photos to send Martha and asked her to line up a current valuation for comparison. I also printed the legal authorization Daniel had emailed. Reading every line, my chest felt heavy but firm. After I signed, I sealed it in an envelope with a small rose stamp, the one I used to mark literature essays. An old habit, now a symbol of resolve. Late, I sat in my office, the desk lamp glowing on stacks sorted like textbooks. I opened my laptop and created a folder titled Phase 2 Counter-Strike. Each subfolder labeled Financial Evidence, Professional Ethics Evidence, Family Meeting Script, Temporary Lodging Emergency Plan. That last one made me pause. I knew if things spun out, I'd have to leave this house at least for a while. Not out of fear, but to work safely. I called my trusted friend, former principal Joan Reed. Joan, if I need a place for a few days, is your lakeside cottage free? She didn't hesitate. Always a room for an old friend, come whenever. Thank you, it may be soon. I ended the call and opened the window. Night was quiet, just crickets. I wondered how life veered this way from a wife planning meals to a woman planning legal strategy. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. When trust is gone, instinct and reason take over. Next morning, I got up early, brewed coffee, and prepped materials to send Daniel. When Victor stepped out of the bedroom, I kept the same calm as always. He asked, "You're up early?" "Couldn't sleep. I want to reorganize the file cabinet and get the tax binder ready." He nodded, not the least bit suspicious. I watched him head for the door, the key ring with the AirTag glinting in the sun. The blue dot on my phone's map would start moving again, leading me to places he never imagined were being tracked. I smiled not bitterly, just the smile of someone who knows she's holding the upper hand. That afternoon, I got a confirmation email from Daniel Whitaker. Received all documents. Account freeze order will be submitted at 8:30 a.m., Monday. Have your ID and the power of attorney ready to sign at the bank. After that, we'll plan the family meeting later in the week. Let them believe you're still the gentle woman they think they know. I reread the last line, let them believe. I don't think I've ever seen advice so perfectly true. That evening, I baked an apple pie, Victor's favorite. When he came home, I served it like nothing was wrong. He said, "This is great. You always know how to spoil me." I smiled and answered softly, "Sometimes I just want things a little warmer, before they go completely cold." He laughed, not understanding, and I looked down at the rich, fragrant slice of pie, thinking, in 2 days, you'll know what it feels like to lose everything. The night before Monday, I organized the files one last time and tucked them into a leather bag. On the sticky note outside, I wrote briefly, Monday, 8:30 a. Freeze. Wednesday, family meeting. No trembling. No forgiveness. I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a long moment. Moonlight slipped through the curtains and fell across my hand, the hand that had cooked meals, written lesson plans, wiped my son's tears. Now it was about to sign the paper that would change our family's course forever. But maybe justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from a woman who stands up quietly at the right time. Monday morning, 7:45. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, looking out at the garden still covered in dew. Everything was quiet, except the clock ticking like a countdown. Next to me, my phone showed a new email from Blue Ridge Community Bank. Confirmation of temporary legal hold on accounts. I read that line over and over, feeling like I'd just laid the first brick of a protective wall. Right at 8:30, per Daniel Whitaker's plan, all joint accounts for Victor and me were completely frozen. Every transaction, credit card, auto transfer, everything stopped at once. I pictured Victor at a gas station, swiping his card like usual, and the machine saying, transaction declined. He'd probably think it was a glitch. But in a few hours he'd learn the error wasn't in the machine, it was in his choices. 9:55. My phone buzzed. Victor's name lit the screen. I answered slowly. Linda? Can you check what's going on? My card won't run. The ATM's failing too. Even the auxiliary business account is locked. I kept my voice even. Really? I'll call the bank and ask. They're probably doing maintenance, but it's weird my other joint account is down too. Can you call them for me? Sure, I'll check, don't worry. His voice shook a bit, though he tried to sound calm. I heard typing and a car door slam. He was probably trying to pull cash somewhere. When the call ended, I checked the time exactly 10 a.m. Step 1. Perfect. At 11 a.m., the phone rang again. This time it was Kelsey. Hi, Mom, Victor said. There's an issue with the accounts. I have a friend in the banking system who can take a quick look. If you give me the account numbers, I can call them to speed things up. Her tone was soft, but every word felt like a probe. I let a pause sit, then answered slowly, Oh, that's kind. But I think it's just a technical mix-up. I'll call the bank, no need to trouble you. Mom, banks are usually slow to respond. I just need a few minutes. I cut in gently but firmly. It's okay. I prefer speaking directly. I put the call on speaker and dialed the bank's customer service right in front of her. She didn't know I had auto record turned on. Hello, this is Linda Carver. Our accounts were just frozen. I'd like to know why. The woman on the other end spoke clearly. Yes, Miss Carver. I see the freeze was initiated this morning under our customer protection protocols due to a pattern of suspicious small withdrawals and transfers to an unidentified third party. The hold will remain until verification. I pressed my lips together to hide a smile and asked as if I were truly surprised. Oh, thank you. Is there any way to lift it? No, ma'am. This requires both account holders to appear with identification and the presence of legal counsel. We will contact attorney Daniel Whitaker's office listed on file. Beside me, Kelsey went rigid. I watched the color drain from her face. I turned to her, voice light as small talk. Did you hear that, dear? They said it has to go through my attorney. Good thing he's already reviewing these transactions for me. She forced a laugh. Ah. I see. Must be a misunderstanding. I'll have Victor call back later. Sure. But one more thing. I looked her straight in the eye, still mild. When dealing with a bank, transparency is best. Their systems track closely. Even the tiniest things leave a trace. She swallowed hard, gripping her phone. She was trying to hold it together, but her eyes were pure panic. I poured more tea and slid a cup toward her. This afternoon I'd like you and Jason and Victor to come over for tea just to talk as a family. It's been a while. This afternoon? Yes. There are a few things I want to discuss before it all goes too far. She nodded, struggling to smile. Okay, I'll let Jason know. Thanks. I'll send a formal invitation with Daniel present as well. To keep it proper. I saw her gaze darken for a second. The woman who thought she controlled the board was now in my house, hands shaking around a teacup. I didn't need to shout or threaten. One phrase, my attorney, was enough to tell Kelsey the board had tipped. After she left, I called Daniel Whitaker and recapped everything. He gave a low chuckle, steady as if he'd predicted it. Told you they'd call immediately. They can't stand losing control. Now just wait. I'll send a formal meeting invite for 4 p.m., co-signed by me. Perfect. I want it to feel like a simple chat, but when they arrive, they'll realize it's a hearing. I heard his soft laugh. You have a strategist's instinct, Linda. No. I'm just a wife who trusted too much. At noon, Victor came home. His face was dark, sweat beading on his forehead. Did you call the bank? I've been shut down all morning. Our accountant says the accounts are closed. I feigned confusion and poured him a glass of water. I did. They said there were suspicious transactions. Maybe someone's been using the accounts improperly. Improperly? He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Small, repeated withdrawals, then transfers to a third party. They said they'll go over it with my attorney. We should know more tomorrow. He stared at me, shocked and a little afraid. For the first time in months, he couldn't hide. The confident posture, the calm tone gone. I stayed seated, smiling as I slid the invitation across the table. This afternoon, I've invited you, Jason, and Kelsey over for tea. We need to talk. He glanced at the paper and saw Daniel Whitaker's signature. His mouth trembled. You actually hired a lawyer? Yes. Sometimes to keep the peace, you need a witness. He said nothing, eyes darting away, then grabbed his keys and left without another word. I watched him go, feeling no old ache. When the door closed, I exhaled and carefully folded the second invitation for Kelsey and Jason and slipped it into an envelope. I emailed a copy to Daniel. Subject line, Carver family, meeting at 4 p.m. Today, attorney present. In the body, I wrote briefly, requesting full attendance of all parties. This meeting is conciliatory in nature before proceeding with further legal steps. After sending, I stood and set the tea table. The house was quiet again, only the steady tick of the clock. I looked at the white porcelain cups and polished each one. Everything had to be perfect, because this afternoon, in this room, the truth would be poured like hot tea, impossible to take back. I smiled faintly. They think I'm gentle, fragile. But they forget, once that woman learns to control the money, the very thing they used to control her, the whole game changes. Outside, sunlight slanted through the window, spilling across the table. I topped off the kettle and listened to the soft boil. A new chapter was about to begin, and this time, every card was in my hand. That afternoon, Asheville's sky wore a thin veil of clouds, a pale light that made everything in the house look as if it were waiting. I set the tea in the living room, the place that had been the calm heart of our family, now a temporary hearing room for the most important confrontation of my life. On the table, between the white cups and the jasmine pot, I laid a black folder in neat order. Inside was everything I'd gathered over 3 weeks: the money tracker, motel receipt, furniture invoices, photos, recordings, location data. Each sheet was a sharp, cold slice of truth. At 4 p.m., sharp, a car stopped out front. I looked out. Victor with Jason and Kelsey. All three stepped out, their faces tight. I opened the door, voice easy. Come in, the tea's just ready. No one answered. Jason tried a strained smile. Kelsey stared at her phone like it could shield her. Victor paused when he saw the formal invite with the law office logo on the table. I seated them, poured tea, then said calmly, "Before we start, I want you to know this conversation is being recorded legally. It's to prevent misunderstandings. No one leaves until we're done." Victor looked up, color draining. "Linda, what is this? You turning the house into a courtroom?" "No, just opening a black box, the one holding everything you thought you'd keep hidden forever." I opened the folder and pulled out the first financial summary. Here are the last 6 months of statements, 24 small cash withdrawals totaling $7,800, all from the joint account. Can you explain why each withdrawal lines up with restaurant and furniture receipts and the address of Hearth and Home? Victor said nothing. Jason looked at his father. Kelsey shifted, fists tight around her phone. I went on, steady and clear. And here's the Green Valley Motel receipt, room 214, cash payment. March 8th. That day you told me power outage at the shop, had to stay and watch the machines. I checked the AirTag on your keys. It sat at that exact location for over 4 hours. Victor lifted his head, lips pressed, eyes avoiding mine. You were tracking me? No, I learned to protect myself. And this? I slid another printout as a photo of the red lipstick on your shirt collar. The shade matches crimson rose, the one Kelsey uses. I noticed it on her vanity that same day. The room froze. Jason's voice cracked. "Mom, what are you saying?" I looked at my son, softer for a moment. "I didn't want to, sweetheart. But silence is complicity. And I can't be complicit in wrong." I turned to Kelsey, opened my laptop, and played the recording. Her voice filled the still air. "If joint improvements can be proven, the other side can claim a share. What matters is who prepares first. Won't lose anything." Kelsey went pale, lips trembling. "You recorded me, Mom?" "I was just speaking in theory." "Really?" That's odd, because right after that, a motel booking email from Kelsey, lawfirm@gmail, matches the exact time the AirTag shows Victor on site. I have the screenshots, and the IP address matches Jason's home Wi-Fi. Jason shot to his feet, hands shaking. "Kelsey?" She grabbed his hand. "Jason, let me explain." I cut in, still calm. "No need. I also have confirmation from Mrs. Collins, the neighbor. Across the street. She saw Victor at your house at least 3 times a week while you were at work. She even snapped the license plate, thinking a stranger kept showing up." Victor stared at his lap, fingers knotted. Jason sagged back into his chair. I knew this would wreck him, but truth waits for no one. I slid over Martha's valuation. "These are the home improvement costs you plan to use for reimbursement. Every item paid from my separate account, with my signature on deliveries. This house is entirely separate property. No one has a right to even a percent." Kelsey bit her lip, eyes wet, but I saw no remorse, only fear. I pushed the final set of papers to Victor, a separation ultimatum. "Victor, I've already signed. You keep the shop and the truck, they're your labor and contribution. But this house, my mother's house, where I've lived all my life, you won't touch it. If you sign today, I won't pursue criminal charges for financial abuse or interference with ownership. If not, my attorney files in the morning." He opened his mouth, and I lifted my chin, voice cooler. "And before you say anything untrue, remember this is being recorded legally. I've filed notice of recording with counsel. No one leaves until we're done." The air thickened. I could hear the clock ticking like the house's heartbeat. I looked straight at Kelsey, voice low but firm. "As for you, I've filed an ethics complaint with the North Carolina Bar for using your legal knowledge for personal gain within the family. They'll investigate. Maybe it's a suspension, maybe disbarment. That depends on what you choose today." Her mouth fell open, lips quivering, hands laced as if to hide them. Jason stared at his wife, eyes full of hurt and disappointment. I stood and gave a small signal. The door opened and Daniel Whitaker walked in, jacket crisp, file case in hand. He glanced around, nodded to each of them, and sat beside me. His voice was low and steady. "I represent Mrs. Linda Carver. This meeting is formally noted in the civil record as a witnessed family conciliation. Objective: reach a voluntary separation and confirm asset allocation. From this moment, all statements carry legal weight. If anyone leaves, it's considered a forfeit of response." Victor sat rigid. Kelsey hung her head, tears starting. Jason watched me, torn in two. I knew he was breaking, but at least he would see with his own eyes, not through someone else's sweet lies. Daniel reviewed the record I'd assembled. I didn't interrupt. I just watched my hands around the warm teacup, lighter than I'd felt in years. After 40 years of blind trust, for the first time, truth was on my side. When he finished, he said clearly, "Mrs. Carver offers 2 options: sign the separation today or the case proceeds to county court. All parties are advised to limit statements to avoid aggravating factors." Silence stretched so long I could hear the wind outside. Then Victor nodded slightly, voice rough. "I'll sign." I didn't smile or nod. I set the pen in front of him and said quietly, "Good." "And you, Kelsey?" I met her eyes. "I don't need an apology. I just need you to leave my son's life and let him heal. As for your career, let the bar decide," Kelsey cried. "Head down." Jason sat still, eyes wet. I had no tears left. I only wanted the long afternoon to end so the house could have the quiet it deserved. Daniel gathered the file, verified each signature, then asked, "This meeting is concluded. Copies will be retained with my office and the county court. Mrs. Carver, anything to add?" I looked around the room that had been this family's heart. The photos on the wall, wedding, birthdays, vacations were still there, but their meaning had changed. I answered softly, "No. Everything that needed saying the truth has already said it for me." Daniel nodded. He stood, packed the papers, and I closed the black folder, my own black box. It held not just evidence of betrayal, but proof I'd stopped being passive. When the door shut behind them, the house fell silent, with only a trace of jasmine tea in the air. I sat, closed my eyes, and knew every last lie had been stripped bare. Right after Daniel left, the room sank into a heavy quiet. No more crisp legal voice, no more shuffling papers. Only Kelsey's ragged breaths, broken, shaky, like someone trying to catch the last bit of air. She slumped in the chair, hair falling over half her face. The perfect makeup from earlier had streaked black mascara blending with tears. Her hands shook around her phone. When she finally looked up, those eyes weren't arrogant anymore. They were the eyes of someone who'd lost everything, searching for anything to cling to. I stood without a word. Each step on the hardwood sounded dry and final, like a gavel dropping. I opened a drawer and took out a small, carefully folded paper. It was Lily's drawing I kept in my wallet, the one she made in preschool last week. The family standing in the yard, and in the left corner, a tiny figure with a tear running down her cheek. When I asked, Lily had said, "That's Grandma. She's sad because no one wants to play with her." I set the drawing on the table, right in the space between me and Kelsey. "She doesn't understand grown-up things," I said slowly, each word etched into the air, "but kids feel the cold. They know when a smile is fake, when someone is lying." Kelsey stared at the drawing and broke into sobs, head in her hands. No defense left, no excuse strong enough. Victor sat still, as if waking from a trance. He looked at the separation document, the pen shaking in his hand. I didn't rush him or speak. When he finally signed, the scratch of the pen sounded like the period at the end of 40 years. He set the pen down, voice hoarse. "I have nothing left to say." "Right," I answered softly, "because everything you ever said lives in the evidence you left behind." I poured more tea, but no one touched it. I turned to Kelsey. "I won't stop you from seeing Lily. But from now on, every visit goes through Jason and family council. I'm limiting contact with my granddaughter until there's a new court order." "You're not allowed to be alone with her." Kelsey nodded through tears, voice cracking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would end like this." I cut her off, my eyes cold as glass. "You knew. You just didn't think you'd get caught." Jason sat still between us, hands clamped over his head. My son's face was pale, eyes red from tears and shock. He looked at his father, then his wife, like he couldn't fit those two images into the same reality. "No way," Jason muttered. "My dad and my wife?" No one answered. Only a long, heavy silence, the kind where you can hear maple leaves falling on the porch. I knew, in that moment, my son's heart was breaking just like mine once did. I stepped closer, set my hand on Jason's shoulder, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "None of this is your fault, Jason. Don't make yourself carry more." Adults forget that what they do doesn't just break a marriage, it breaks the trust of the innocent. Jason choked up and dropped his head onto my shoulder like a child. I let him cry, my hand moving slowly across his back, feeling pain and relief at the same time. I knew I had saved one thing, the truth, even if it cost the rest of this family. Victor stayed seated, staring into nothing, No trace of the man who once said, "I'll protect you for life." Now he was just an old outline, alone in the wreckage he made. Daniel came back after a few minutes with his case. He spoke quietly to me. "I've completed the confirmations. All documents will be filed with the court in the morning. The assets are divided exactly as you proposed." I nodded. He looked around the room with kind eyes but didn't interfere. As he gathered the files, he slid each page into the leather case, then turned to me. "You should change every password today. I'll send a security template prevents unauthorized access." "I know," I said, "and I will. Bank to phone, email too." When Daniel left, I turned back to clear the table. No one said a word. I heard Victor get up and pull the small suitcase I'd already placed by the door. "I'll go now," he said hoarsely. "I won't come back." I didn't look at him. "That's the best thing you've ever done for me." The door closed. A small sound, but inside me, it thundered. Kelsey staggered onto the porch and pulled out her phone. I heard her voice, strangled with tears. "Jason, I'm sorry. I was wrong. It's my fault, not yours, not anyone else's." Jason looked at her, his cheeks still wet. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Kelsey. I don't know how long I've been living in a lie." She tried to touch his hand, but he stepped back. Not out of hate, because an invisible wall had gone up between them. Love, when betrayed, doesn't shatter like glass right away. It fissures first, then goes numb. Kelsey turned away, crying without sound. Jason stood there like someone who'd lost his bearings. I wanted to say something, but there's no sentence strong enough to mend that. Finally, I said, "Take a few days. Don't stay here. Go to a friend's place or back to your old campus. I'll handle the rest." He nodded, eyes rimmed red. When they both left, the house was quiet enough to hear the clocks tick. I gathered the cold teacups, stacked the leftover folders, and locked them in the office safe. I changed every password, account by account: bank, email, cloud, even an old social media login. I updated security questions, removed old links, and turned on two-factor authentication. Daniel had said, "Whoever controls information controls the board." I understood that now more than ever. When I finished, I opened the cabinet, took the black file, the one I called my black box, sealed it in a waterproof bag, and drove to the bank. I placed all evidence and original papers in a safe deposit box at the main branch. The banker asked, "Anyone besides you authorized to access this?" I smiled faintly. "No one, just me." On the way home, I lowered the window and let the wind through my hair. Asheville cooled toward evening, but I felt a strange calm. I had lost a marriage, lost trust, lost the illusion of a perfect family. In return, I'd gained freedom, the thing I didn't know I was missing. When I parked at the gate, I looked up at the house, now empty. The last light of day came through the frame, catching tiny dust motes in the air. Maybe tomorrow I'd clean everything, repaint the walls, set a few new pots of flowers. The masks had fallen, the truth was bare, but it was also the first light after years of dark. I shut the car door and gripped my keys. Inside, the house waited for me, quiet, clean, and for the first time, entirely mine. In the days after, my home was quiet again, but not the suffocating kind. It was order and calm, like after a storm when the wind has passed and the ground still smells of rain. I stood in the living room with morning light coming through the windows, dust drifting in the air, dust I hadn't noticed for years because I was too busy, trusting. On the far wall hung our wedding photo, me in white, Victor in a black tux, two young people smiling with the naivete of forever love. I took it down. The dark wood frame left a lighter rectangle, a scar of memory. I wrapped the photo carefully, put it in a box, and sealed it. Not out of hate, but to make room for new light. I repainted the room a warm cream that let the house breathe. With each stroke, I wiped away old layers, not just paint, but silence, hurt, and lies that had clung to these walls. I changed the curtains, reset the desk, arranged the shelves, and hung up the landscape Lily drew for me. Grandma and me in the garden. It was simple, but when I looked at it, I felt a joy I'd forgotten. I decided to turn the house into a literature classroom. Every morning, I held a small class for older neighbors, people who'd left school for life and children. We read Shakespeare, Dickinson, Frost, and sometimes wartime love letters. They told me they came not just to learn, but to remember how to keep living. Maybe I was learning that too. One April afternoon, Jason came back. He'd lost weight, but his eyes were lighter. He stood at the door, a suitcase in hand. "I'm coming home for a while, Mom. Lily needs a quiet place." I only nodded and opened my arms. We hugged for a long time. I didn't say welcome home because it had never stopped being his home. With Jason back, the house had laughter again. After therapy sessions Daniel helped arrange, Lily started sleeping through the night, fewer bad dreams. She sang and drew again, only now her pictures didn't have Grandma crying in the corner. We gardened together. Each morning Lily and I planted another row of white daisies. Jason fixed the fence and repainted the gate. In his eyes I saw a light I hadn't seen for a long time, the light of someone learning to forgive himself. I also saw a therapist, as Daniel suggested. Dr. Marion, silver hair and a steady voice, told me, "Linda, forgiveness doesn't mean accepting what they did. Forgiveness means you let yourself move on without carrying them in every step." I wrote that in my notebook. At night I'd reread it and add, "I didn't seek justice for revenge. I sought it so I could rest." When the legal work was done, I set up a trust for Lily. The house, savings, and small investments would slash and did all be hers when she was grown. I didn't leave anything to anyone else, not out of spite, but to end the loop of grabbing and dependence. Lily deserved a future that starts with trust, not suspicion. As for Kelsey, I had no contact. Daniel told me the disciplinary process was underway. The ethics committee had opened a review, my recordings included. Maybe she'd be suspended, maybe worse. I didn't feel happy or sad. Everyone learns their own lesson, the one they choose. Victor still ran the little shop outside town. None of us reached out. I wasn't angry anymore, but I didn't need to forgive either. We all have our roads, and mine was clear, now straight, with no one else's shadow. Summer came, and the neighborhood buzzed again. Neighbors brought apple pie, strawberry jam, and handwritten cards. "We admire you, Linda. Thank you for showing us courage has no age." I lined the cards on a shelf, each one a small piece of returned faith. At night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat by the window and wrote a journal called Lessons from the Marriage Class. I didn't write about betrayal. I wrote about what survives loss, self-respect, clarity, and the strength to stand up. I wrote, "Love is a long class. Some graduate with honors, some walk out empty-handed. But if we listen closely, even wounds can teach us something." I sent a draft to the local paper, and they ran it in the Life After 60 section. People called and wrote to say my story helped them leave bad relationships. I wasn't a hero, just someone who finished her own lesson. Then, one late fall afternoon, Lily turned 6. We made a chocolate cake and lit 6 small candles. As she closed her eyes to wish, Jason and I shared a look without words. The 3 of us blew out the candles together. The little flames died, and the white smoke curled up like an old spirit finally released. Lily cheered. "Grandma, Mom says when you blow out candles you have to make a secret wish." I smiled. "So what did you wish for?" "That you'll always be here, so I can tell you stories every night." I pulled her close, her hair smelling like sunshine. On the porch, white daisies trembled in the wind. Inside me, not the scar of betrayal anymore, but a new foundation built from old bricks. I said softly, a closing line to all those long months, "Grandma will always be here, Lily." Some women, when their house collapses, Don't leave, they rebuild it, stronger, brighter, and full of love. That was the day I knew I'd walked the whole painful road and stepped into a new one where freedom, trust, and peace were the fair rewards for someone who rose in the ruins. November in Asheville, the season turned. Trees along Montford Avenue switched colors, red like coals after summer's fire. I stood at the classroom window and watched Lily play in the yard with neighborhood kids. She laughed, circling the white daisies we planted in spring. No one would guess this house had once been a battlefield of lies. That morning, pouring a second cup of tea, the phone rang. Unknown number, familiar tone. Mrs. Linda Carver? I'm the assistant with the North Carolina State Bar Disciplinary Committee. We're calling with the result of the investigation into Miss Kelsey Moore. I held my breath. Yes, I'm listening. After reviewing the file, recordings, and evidence you provided, the council has decided on a 5-year suspension and requires restitution of legal costs and a civil damages payment to you, per court order. I didn't cheer or glow. I set the cup down and let the steam drift like a long sigh. Some wins need no applause, only the return of calm. A week later, Daniel stopped by with a thick file. The county court's approval of the property agreement between Victor and me. The house, savings, and Lily's trust all in my name. He set the pen down and said evenly, "You can rest now. It's officially closed. No one can touch these assets." I nodded quietly. He understood I didn't need more words. The court also issued a restraining order against Victor 300 feet from my house, no expiration. When Jason heard, he said only one thing: "This should have happened sooner, Mom." I saw some of the weight lift from his eyes. He was learning to stand without bitterness. Once the paperwork had seals, Jason filed for divorce from Kelsey. I knew it wasn't easy. Logic says yes. The heart splits again. But this time, my son walked straight, no longer led by blind love. I went with Jason to the first hearing. Family court wasn't crowded, just the scratch of pens and the smell of new paper. When the judge asked, Jason spoke with steady restraint. "I'm seeking custody of Lily, Your Honor. She deserves to grow up in a healthy environment." The judge scanned the file and nodded. Evidence of Kelsey's ethical violations made everything clear. By the end, the judge ruled temporary custody and educational decision-making to Mr. Jason Carver. Mother's visitation with supervision, up to twice a month. I couldn't hold back tears, but this time they were relief. I hugged my son outside and whispered, "You did it, Jason." "It's going to be okay," he answered, voice shaking. "I still have a place to come home to because of you, Mom." News moved quietly through the neighborhood. No gossip, just understanding. People looked at me with that quiet respect saved for those who walk through fire without burning. Victor, Daniel said, sold the machine shop, liquidated the rest, and moved to Tennessee, maybe to start over, maybe to escape the eyes of the past. I didn't ask more. Sometimes leaving is punishment enough. Kelsey left the state after losing her license. A friend said she's working at a small office in Missouri, teaching legal skills to students. I don't know if that's true. I only hope that when she lectures, she remembers the law isn't a shield for deception, it's a hand for protecting justice. With the old faces gone, my life turned a new page, quiet but meaningful. One early winter day, the president of the Asheville Women's Club visited my class. Afterward, she smiled. "Linda, we'd like you to share your story at our next workshop. Topic is financial self-defense for older women. No one can tell it as plainly as you." I hesitated, then agreed. The next week, I stood in a room of women in their 60s and 70s, silver hair, kind smiles, and that light I recognized in myself, fear and hope together. I told my story without anger, just steady. I talked about catching financial fraud inside a family, protecting accounts, and most of all, protecting trust. I explained family fraud investigation in simple terms. Sometimes the person who deceives you isn't a stranger. But the law still stands with whoever tells the truth. Someone asked, "Do you regret doing all that?" I smiled. No, justice isn't for revenge. It's how you close a chapter without bowing your head. The talk ended with long applause. An older woman squeezed my hand, eyes wet. "Thank you, Linda. Because of you, I'm checking my joint account tonight." I laughed and squeezed back. That's a good student. That night, back home, I opened my laptop and looked at the documents that ended the long stretch: the restraining order, asset decree, suspension decision, and custody order, all tidy in a folder named Justice. I printed one copy of each, bound them, and set them on the shelf next to my favorite classics. Lamplight hit the glass, highlighting the first line on the file: Linda Carver versus Victor Carver and Kelsey Moore, Civil and Family Case, 2025. I ran a hand over the title, not with bitterness, but with rare peace. Lily ran in and hugged my legs. "Grandma, can I tell the class tomorrow how you teach?" "Justice?" I laughed. "Justice, huh? Do you know what that is?" She tilted her head, thinking, then said, "It's when the bad person says sorry to the good person." I hugged her, laughing through tears. "Close enough, Lily." But sometimes justice doesn't need an apology. It comes quietly, sealed with a red stamp. That night, I wrote the final page of Lessons from the Marriage class. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't always arrive with a gavel or late apologies. It arrives in documents, signatures, and restored trust, and when it does, the once deceived can lift her head, smile, and move on without regret. I closed the notebook, blew out the small candle, and looked around the house, once a battleground, now a sanctuary of truth. A cold breeze moved across the porch, carrying the last leaves of fall, and I knew justice had arrived quietly, but right on time, like a guest I'd been waiting for my whole life. I never thought I'd start over at this age on my own, but not alone. People ask if I'll remarry. I just smile. After a lifetime learning love, I know some things last longer without a chain. Happiness is simple now: Lily's laughter in the yard, Jason calling, "Mom, I made tea," and late afternoons with my literature group. They come not just to read, but to learn to love themselves again, just as I did. I spend more time in the garden out back, rows of white daisies, purple lavender, and tulips from last spring. Every morning I water them and watch dew gather on the leaves. When Lily plays, I show her how to plant seeds and tell her flowers are like people, they need light and rain to grow. The anger is gone. Forgiveness doesn't excuse the betrayer. It frees me from the chains of the past. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it lets me walk past it without carrying the rage. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I stand in the hall and watch Lily sleep. She's curled in her pink blanket, breathing evenly, face soft as an angel. I smile. Every loss, every wound worth it if it leads to this. Peace without pretending. On Sunday morning, I hung a small wooden sign on the porch. Hand-carved letters, white paint on old oak, "Only truth lives here." I ran my fingers over each stroke, like touching a promise to myself. In this house, there's no room for lies, fear, or dependence. Only honest love and trust built with time. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to myself. Linda, you've walked the longest road of your life, from naive to awake. You won not with hate, but with clear thinking and steady heart. You kept what mattered most: honor, freedom, and light inside. I folded the letter into Lessons from the Marriage class. Outside, Asheville light slipped through the curtains in golden lines across the hardwood. I closed my eyes and listened to wind in the branches and Lily humming somewhere in the yard. 40 years, all the ups and downs and wreckage, just to learn something simple. A house doesn't keep people for long. A house keeps only the truthful. And this morning, as sunlight crossed the frame and warmed my cup, I smiled. the final exam of my life graded. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of this road. If you're still here, it means you listened not just with your ears, but with your own scars, memories, and lessons. I tell this not to reopen pain, but to remind us, even after betrayal, we can stand without losing our dignity. Because justice isn't just in a courtroom, it's in the way we choose to live the rest of our days, peaceful, self-respecting, and without hate. And if this story made you feel seen or stronger, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so we can keep going together, sharing stories of strength, grace, and the small miracles of everyday life. I'm grateful you listened and stayed like a quiet friend sitting with me in this small house, reminding me there are still hearts that understand and believe in the good. If Mom can't remember things clearly anymore, no one will blame us for applying for guardianship. I froze behind the half-closed door, my suitcase still tagged from the flight I just canceled to come back for a will. Inside, my son Spencer's voice was calm, like he was talking about taxes, not plotting to take away his mother's right to live. Naomi, his wife, spoke softly but clearly. Attorney Carr said if we file early, she won't be able to pull back the assets. I clenched the keys in my hand, the cold sinking into my chest. The boy who once held my hand through a fever was now whispering an idea to turn his mother into someone powerless. I didn't cry. I just opened my phone, hit record, and shut the suitcase. The flight to Florida was postponed indefinitely. Because tonight, before they file their first form, I'm going to rewrite this whole play, and the victim will no longer be me. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Loretta Myers, 65, widowed for 6 years, living alone in a small house on the edge of Madison, Wisconsin. I spent my life in archives at the Dane County Historical Museum. People still call me Mrs. Myers from the stacks, because I remember where every manuscript, every envelope, every signature lives, like each one has its own soul. I'm not rich, but I live neatly, and I've always believed honesty and order keep life running steady. I raised Spencer on that belief that if you work hard and live straight, you never have to lie to anyone. But standing behind that door, hearing him map out how to legitimize stripping his own mother's personhood, I understood. There are things you can preserve your whole life and still never preserve the human heart. I turned the car around. The GPS still showed the route to the airport, but I shut it off and let the road pull me back toward Maplewood, where my house sits under old maples, where everything used to be peaceful to the point of dull. I parked under the same tree, as every year, the spot where Arthur, my husband, liked to wash the car on Saturday mornings. The difference is, this year he's been gone 6 years, and our only son is working to take the rest of me too. I stepped out without locking the door. My footsteps on the stone path sounded dry and hard. From the dining room came a hush of voices, trailing into the study. I pressed against the wall and peered through a sliver of light. Spencer was on speaker, eyes pinned to a pile of papers. A name came through clearly: Rudy Carr, a man's voice, low, professional, distant. First step is to file for a capacity assessment. If there are medical notes, even better. How old is she? 65. Good. With a few behavior notes, we can get temporary guardianship for the son. I felt my blood go cold, each heartbeat like a hammer in my skull. I realized this wasn't a moment of bad judgment. This was a prepared plan, with legal advice and a clear goal: turn me into a senile old woman so they could control the money. I stepped back half a pace and touched the wall to steady myself. The mother in me wanted to walk in and shout, "What are you doing?" But I stopped myself. No, not now. Not without knowing how far they've gone. I chose intentional silence. I moved quietly to the kitchen, opened the oak china cabinet where I'd hidden a secondary safe behind the dish shelves. The key was still in the pocket of an old raincoat. I slid it in, turned it, and heard a tiny click that made my heart skip. Inside was Arthur Myers's original will, the one I've always kept hidden, leaving only a copy for Spencer. Arthur once said, "If I'm not here, don't let anyone sign for you, not even our son." Paper only tells the truth when you hold it yourself. I pulled out the thick envelope and looked at Arthur's familiar handwriting, the same hand he used for notes to me. Part of me wanted to cry. The other part had never been clearer. I slipped the envelope into my bag, along with the keys and the phone that was still recording. As I headed out, I glanced down the hall. Spencer was still on with Rudy Carr, walking and scribbling in a notebook. Naomi stood with arms crossed, eyes cool, like an outsider. I slipped out like a shadow so light the floorboards didn't speak. The door eased shut behind me, the hinge giving a small scrape and ending punctuation to the role of the gentle mother I'd tried to hold. Outside, the late winter Wisconsin wind cut through skin. I got in the car and took a long breath. On the passenger seat was the unopened suitcase clothes, a book, and a ticket to Florida. I turned on the cabin light and stared at today's date on the ticket. I gave a thin smile. "No, Loretta," I told myself. "Your trip isn't to Florida. It starts right here." I started the engine without turning on the radio. The hum in the quiet sounded like a promise. No explanations, no begging, just action. I drove through downtown, holiday lights still dangling off porches, twinkling in the rear view. Madison looked as calm as ever, but for me, everything had changed. I didn't know my first move yet, only that when people think I'm weak, that's when I have to be stronger than ever. I didn't go back to the motel, and I didn't call anyone. I drove straight to the Dane County Historical Museum, where I'd spent over 3 decades. People still call me Mrs. Myers from the archives. There, I learned to read between lines, and that evidence always speaks if you preserve it right. I parked behind the old red brick building, showed my retiree ID to the guard, and borrowed a guest pass. They still remembered me. "Hi, Miss Loretta. Still love the smell of old paper?" I just smiled. In the stacks, paper, wood, and paste glue mixed into a scent that feels like myself. I sat at my old desk, flipped on the lamp, and wrote a plan. 1. Photocopy the original will. 2. Contact a Mater, trustworthy attorney, not through Spencer. 3. Review all account changes over the last 6 months. 4. Gather evidence, audio, paperwork, behaviors. 5. Stay silent until everything is sealed tight. I stared at the list and wondered when I started needing a strategy to protect myself from my own child. Next to me sat the old clock. Arthur gave me the hour hand, gliding slow and steady. Wind hissed at the windows, carrying the Wisconsin cold, and I realized I wasn't shaking at all. By the time I left the museum, dusk had laid a deep gold over the city. I drove toward Lake Monona, the water throwing back broken glass light. I parked, opened my phone, and replayed the first recording. Spencer's voice came through, clear and firm, without a stutter. "If Mom can't remember things clearly anymore, no one will blame us for applying for guardianship." I closed my eyes and felt each word prick like pins in my palm. Then I smiled the smile of someone who knows the first piece of evidence is in hand. I said to myself, low and even, "Okay, Spencer. If you want to fight with paperwork, then I'll let the paperwork speak for me." I started the car and checked the mirror. The lights of my house glowed far off, but that light wasn't home anymore. It was the first stage of a fight I never thought I'd have to enter. And I knew when morning comes, the victim won't be me. I sat for a few more minutes, letting the Monona wind slip through the cracked window. It carried a metallic chill, a damp smell, and a faint trace of old paper from the brick building behind me. That smell, the smell of archives, of time, settles me. Maybe only in the world of documents, labels, and chain of custody do I feel whole. I am Loretta Myers, registrar at the Dane County Historical Museum for over 30 years. My job was to guard what others called the past. Letters, wills, maps, journals, fragile things that hold entire lives. At 65, it's bitterly funny that I have to apply that exact workflow to my own life. I took a long breath and carried my bag inside. The basement hallway was still lit by warm, dim tubes, the light skimming cracks on the wall like the grain of memory. I passed the heavy wooden door with the brass plate, archives, staff only, now a little darker. Inside, paste glue and oak welcomed me like an old friend. This space hasn't changed orderly. Quiet, honest. No pretending here. No son talking guardianship. No young wife calculating inheritance. Just paper, ink, and proof. I went to the back table by the cabinet, the place I'd spent thousands of hours accessioning donations. My hand rested on the wood, still smooth, still warm like skin. I opened my bag and took out the envelope with Arthur's original will. The instant the paper hit the lamp's glow, I felt like he was here, standing behind me, watching me work just like he used to. I opened the envelope carefully, pulled out each sheet, and put them in numbered order. On top sat the notes Arthur once wrote by hand, which I typed up for him in 2016. He told me, "We need to be clear, Loretta. Black and white is the only thing that protects people when feelings change." I read that line again, my chest tight. Under executor, my name was bold, black, straight. Arthur even underlined it in red, like he wanted to make sure no one, not even his son, could miss it. Along the margin of the last page was a slanted note in his hand, the ink slightly smudged. "Do not grant full authority to our son without an independent evaluation. No matter what, Loretta must be the final approval." I put my fingers on it, a slight tremor in my tips. Had he seen this coming years ago? Maybe Arthur understood Spencer better than I did. And I, the mother who covered for him and went soft, was the last to see. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened my notebook and wrote, "Copy the entire will. Find a new, independent lawyer. Audit all account changes in the last 6 months. No confrontation, only collection. Every document needs a timestamp and storage location." I set the pen down and drew a long breath. In this archive, I wasn't a betrayed mother anymore. I was a custodian of evidence, like I've always been. I know how to handle truth. Number, copy, store, seal. A document only has value if it's preserved correctly, just like justice only exists when proven by evidence, not by words. I powered up the old scanner, squared each page, and listened to its soft grind. I labeled each file, Arthur Will Original, PDF, Scan by Loretta, timestamp, 8:47 p.m. I created a new folder on my external drive. Evidence Log 1. In the description I typed, "First verified document, original last will and testament of Arthur Myers. Executor, Loretta Myers. Valid until revoked." At the bottom, I added, "Evidence duplicated by the direct party. No third party." These steps are muscle memory now. Every move exact, like handling a priceless donation. I could hear my old professor in my head. Chain of custody is the lifeline of evidence. One slip, and the truth collapses. I can't slip. Not this time. When the screen flashed Scan Complete, I plugged in a USB and made another copy titled Personal Backup. Then I used my phone to take photos of the process from the table corner to the wall clock to create secondary proof of time and place. For each photo I added, proof of chain, Loretta Myers, Dane County Historical Museum, December 12th, 8:53 p.m. For the first time in months, my heartbeat felt steady and justified. I looked around. Shelf after shelf to the ceiling, boxes labeled by year and topic, all familiar. I remembered hundreds of late nights here, debating whether to repair a torn letter or leave time's mark. We used to say the truth doesn't need to be pretty, it just needs to exist. That's what I'm doing now, preserving a truth my own son is trying to bend. I checked the clock. After 9. Security would lock up soon. I put the original into a moisture-proof sleeve, sealed it, and slid it into my bag. I opened my phone and wrote a new note. December 12th, first step done. Original evidence duplicated. No notifications sent. I read it back and locked the screen. At the door, I turned for one last look at the dark wood frame. I remembered my first day. Arthur brought a lunchbox and said, "You picked right, no one protects the past like you." Back then, I thought he meant old letters or oil paintings. I didn't know that 30 years later, I'd be protecting my own past from the hands of the person I brought into this world. I switched off the lights and stepped into the hall. My heels clicked, calm and even. At the end, the glass showed a small woman with a straight back, gray hair, and bright eyes. Maybe getting older isn't about getting weaker, it's about being less afraid. Cold air hit when I pushed outside, but I didn't lift my collar. The wind cleared my head. On the steps, I looked down at my car under the maple, the streetlight honeying the hood. I realized I no longer felt old, small, or threatened. I had a plan, a path. Most of all, I had a truth under proper custody, right process, right rules, exactly as a true registrar would do. I went down, opened the car, set the bag carefully, and started the engine. In the rear view, the brick building shrank to a warm pin of light in the Wisconsin mist. I spoke softly to myself, or maybe to Arthur. "Don't worry." I still remember the workflow. And I drove toward the lights ahead where the next step was waiting. On the way home, I turned on the heat and still felt cold. Not from Madison's night wind or the first flakes tapping the glass, but from the truth forming in my mind, the truth I should have seen long ago. When you're betrayed, the first shock isn't the words, it's realizing all the warning signs were always there, and you chose to look away. I remembered the months after Arthur died. Spencer had just been promoted. Naomi was opening a home goods shop. They visited often, bringing food, flowers, and perfectly timed care. I thought it was love. Looking back now, each gesture was a calculated test. The first odd thing was Spencer switching accountants on his own. Our old guy, Mr. Patterson, had handled the family more than 2 decades. One afternoon, Spencer showed up with a polite smile, laid a packet on the table, and said gently, "Mom, I think Mr. Patterson's too old, keeps making mistakes. I know a younger firm that's quick. Just sign here, it's only changing the billing address." I signed, didn't read closely. I even joked, "You really look out for me." I didn't know that signature opened the door for Spencer to control the joint accounts. After that, all tax notices and bank statements went to an inbox Spencer set up for Mom. I didn't push back. I was tired, sorting Arthur's things, and didn't have the stomach for cold figures. Then one day, I found the property taxes were on auto pay. I'd never authorized it, but the bill said auto pay, initiated by authorized party. When I called the office, the clerk asked, "Mrs. Myers, that's your son, right?" He sent a notarized authorization. "We thought you knew." I didn't remember signing anything. Instead of digging in, I gave a weak laugh. I must have forgotten. I told myself Spencer just wanted to help. Now I see each explanation like shards of mirror reflecting the whole plan. About 6 months later, Naomi started nudging me toward a memory support service. Honey in her voice. "You know, at your age, everyone needs little reminders. We just want you comfortable, not having to remember too much." They sent a young woman who called herself an elder care coordinator. She logged everything, meds, appointments, even my walk times. I felt smothered, but out of politeness, I let her do it. I learned later every note fed straight to Spencer, a tidy behavior observation report. Naomi was slicker. She installed a pill reminder app on my phone to help you not forget. Soon, I noticed the account was tied to her email, and she held the password. When I asked, she laughed. "Don't worry, I remember better than you." I laughed too, that easy laugh of someone who thinks she's still in control. I didn't know those pill boxes would later be used to prove signs of forgetfulness. One fall evening last year, Spencer brought a glossy brochure for a senior community. He set it down, voice so gentle it sounded fake. "Take a look, Mom. They have gardens, a reading room, even yoga. We think you might be happier with friends your age." I remember staying quiet. The pictures showed smiling seniors in a green lawn, honeyed sunshine. Their eyes were empty. I didn't like it. Spencer mistook my silence for agreement. I flipped pages, smelled the heavy ink, and shut it. Back then, I still believed it was just overdone concern. But the last dinner before my flight, the night I thought was ordinary, was the clearest sign. Naomi cooked wine-braised ham. Spencer queued up jazz, like a warm family night. Only the conversation bent strange. "Do you remember what day it is?" Naomi asked lightly. "Thursday, if I'm not wrong." "Oh no, it's Tuesday." Spencer chuckled. "Mom, you mix it up a lot lately." I laughed along, but it felt like a door closing. Now I know they were recording my reactions, every glance and answer, so weeks later they could use it as evidence. I wasn't angry then, just tired. Tired from the years alone, from life losing its rhythm. Arthur gone, I slowed down, and they the young equated slower with incapable. I thought, let the kids take care of me. It's fine. Now, under the streetlights in the mirror, I see how each small act locked into the next like links in a chain meant to hold me. When I got home, I flipped on the kitchen light and pulled out the brown leather notebook Arthur gave me when I retired. I set the pen down and wrote, as if drafting an incident report, March Spencer changed the accountant and created an email to receive the bills himself. May property tax autopay showed up without my signature. June Naomi installed a medication reminder app and kept the password. August Spencer introduced a senior living center. October. At dinner, they tried to mislead me about the day of the week. I added the time, place, people involved, how they spoke, even the tone. I had made hundreds of reports like that throughout my career. Every time an artifact was moved or a document was damaged, I wrote a detailed description. Now, I was building a file on the erosion of trust. I wrote, until near midnight, the desk lamp washing over pages packed with words. My hand ached, but my mind felt strangely clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't writing a journal, I was writing evidence. When I closed the notebook, I looked at the last line. This isn't support. This is a scripted setup for a diminished capacity proceeding. I read the words again. They hurt, but they were accurate. Spencer was no longer just a clumsy son trying to control his mother. He was coached, lawyered up, planned. Naomi was no longer a deft daughter-in-law. She was a witness, a data collector. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the clock tick. In the dim light, the house looked different, not a refuge anymore, but a silent scene. I knew I needed what an archivist always has, a model of action. No emotion, only procedure, no haste, only recording and verification. I pulled a blank sheet from the drawer and set it in the old typewriter, the one Arthur used to write me love. Letters. The keys struck slowly, each letter appearing on the page. Protection, Plan L. Myers. Under that, I bullet-pointed the next steps. Collect all electronic data. Contact the tax office again to confirm authorizations. Create time-stamped copies of every document. No direct confrontation. Don't say anything that could be recorded and used. I finished typing, pulled the page out, folded it in thirds, and slipped it into a sealed envelope. On the front, I handwrote, First sealing, December 13th. When I placed the envelope in the safe, a calm spread through my chest. I was no longer the mother crying behind a door. I was myself again, an archivist who knows how to preserve the truth, even when the truth hurts. Outside, the wind hissed through the window seams. I stood, turned off the lights, and left only the small lamp in the corner, the pale yellow glow reflecting off our old wedding photo of Arthur and me. He was smiling, and I was tilting my head down, holding a bouquet of white lilies. I whispered, "Do you see, love? In the end, I'm still doing my job, only this time. The subject under preservation is my own life." I latched the window and drew the curtains. In that small house, there were no more tears, only the soft rustle of paper, the sound of a woman beginning her counterattack, one line, one piece of evidence at a time. I never thought I'd see the day I had to fake confusion. I've spent my life with things that demand precision down to the number and the comma. And yet now, I had to practice forgetting intentionally making mistakes, letting things get messy to convince my own son that his mother was slipping into the dim edges of old age. The next morning, I drove to a small electronics shop on the corner of State Street. The young clerk looked at me, polite but a little unsure when he heard my question. "Do you have a recorder that's really small and doesn't beep when it starts?" He handed me a mini recorder no bigger than a thumb, matte black with a cool metal shell. "This one runs about 4 hours, and the audio's pretty clear. It's easy, just press and hold for 1 second. I nodded, paid cash, and didn't leave any membership info. Walking out, I felt like there was a second heart in my coat pocket, small, silent, always listening. I tested it in the car, pressed and held, saw the red light blink once and disappear. Perfect. No beep, no extra light, only silence, exactly what I needed. The next morning, I started staging forgetfulness. I left the kettle lid popped just enough for steam to fog the stovetop. I set an unopened envelope in the middle of the dining table, next to a half-finished crossword with a few wrong entries, a capless pen rolling on the edge. I even forgot to turn on the heat so the house held a faint chill, the kind that makes anyone walking in think, an absent-minded old lady forgot the thermostat. I opened the curtains to let winter light flood in bright enough for my cabinet camera to catch everything. The house now looked exactly the way they wanted to imagine me, a solitary mother starting to slip. Before leaving the kitchen, I tucked the mini recorder into a seam of my gray wool cardigan, right where an old stitch once was. A slight tilt, and the mic pointed outward. I tried standing, sitting, bending, moving, no sound. Good. Then I left the door unlocked, just as Spencer often scolded me for. "Mom, you forget to lock the door all the time. It's dangerous." This time I'd forget again with a very clear reason. At exactly 10:20, Spencer's car pulled up. I sat at the dining table, wrapped in a thick robe, hair loosely pinned, glasses slipping on my nose. The TV played a vintage show at a whisper. The door opened. "Mom?" His voice was gentle, a little forced. "In the kitchen, honey," I answered, slow and slightly hoarse, just natural enough. It came in with a brown paper bag, the smell of hot soup filling the room. "I brought you chicken soup. Naomi made it. Have you eaten?" "Not yet. I forgot. I looked out the window." He smiled. I recognized that look, half pity, half assessment. Spencer observes the way a man evaluates a product. I let him see every sign he needed, slow, distracted, a little muddled. He set the bag down, poured the soup into a bowl. I reached across the table on purpose and dropped a spoon. Metal hit tile with a crack. I gave a small laugh, shook my head. "See? I'm clumsy. It's okay, Mom. That's why I stopped by," he said, smiling. When we sat, he started exactly as I expected. "How have you been sleeping, Mom?" "Okay. Some mornings I wake up early and then forget what I meant to do," I said, avoiding his eyes. He nodded, eyes flicking to his watch. "Do you remember the insurance letter I sent last week? The one marked policy renewal?" Maybe I put it somewhere," I said, tilting my head and looking around. "Here," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket like a magic trick. "Found it on the table. I can read it to you." "Just a small formality." I smiled. Just a small formality was exactly the signal I'd been waiting for. "Thank you. My eyes aren't great. The print is tiny." He read. Each sentence I captured in my mind like a scanner. He read the parts about adding a co-manager of assets and authorizing representation on behalf of the owner upon signs of cognitive decline. His tone was even, as if it were obvious. When he stopped, I asked softly, feigning hesitation, "So, you're saying I'm about to be not clear-minded enough?" "No, Mom, I just want to be prepared. At this age, everyone should be. Naomi and I only want what's best for you." His voice was as soft as a winter blanket, but each word hit colder than ice. I glanced toward the window where snow drifted past the porch. I murmured, almost to myself, "What day is it again?" Spencer didn't miss a beat. "Wednesday, Mom." "Oh, I thought it was Friday," I said with a shy smile, pretending to forget. "It's okay," he replied. "That's why I've been thinking about a place where you'd be looked after more carefully." Looked after more carefully, it sounded like love and a verdict at once. He started describing a facility with a therapy garden, music, cooking classes, senior chats. His voice was steady, almost as if he were reading from a brochure. I nodded, seeming absent. I dropped the spoon again. Spencer bent to pick it up, his voice light as air. "See? You need help. They have staff there around the clock." I looked at my son, the gentle smile, the tender manner. Underneath it, I saw the trained calculus. They weren't waiting for their mother to grow old, they were building the proof to make her old faster. After lunch, Spencer tidied the dishes. Like a model son, "I'm leaving more soup in the fridge. Eat it over the next couple days." I nodded, pretending to be moved, touched his hand, and said softly, "I'm grateful, sweetheart. You just rest. I'll handle everything." I met his eyes, calm. No anger, no blame. I knew I had captured the entire performance. When the door clicked shut, I sat still, listening to the car pull away. Only when the quiet settled did I stand, slip the tiny recorder from my cardigan, and watch the light blink 3 times, recording complete. I plugged it into the laptop, downloaded the file, replayed a few parts. His voice rang clear, word for word. "Wednesday, Mom. They have staff there around the clock." I saved the file as lunch proposal to relocate, MP3. Next, I opened the encryption app software Marisol had set up for me back in my museum days. I created a new folder. Evidence. Log. 2. Uploaded the audio with this note. Speaker. Spencer Hale. Location. Private residence. Madison, Wisconsin. Time. 12:14 p.m. December 14th. Content. Proposal to relocate and confirmation of memory decline indicators. Then I set a password only I would know, a string tied to the one date no one could guess. The day Arthur proposed. I sat quietly for a while, watching the thin sun angle through the window, lighting the ring left by the hot soup bowl. Everything looked peaceful, but inside this house I knew I'd activated the chain of custody work I'd mastered my whole life, now used to protect me. I spoke to no one but myself, just loud enough to hear, "You want to test me, Spencer? I've archived thousands of documents in my life. Did you think I'd forget how to store one more?" Outside, the snow kept falling. I stood, poured the remaining soup down the drain, steam fogging the glass. Then I wiped every drop away, leaving nothing but calm. When I finished, I switched off the kitchen light, turned, and smiled the smile of a mother who had just completed the first move in a game her son didn't know he was playing. I spent the whole evening staring at audio files, notes, and the to-do list spread across the kitchen table. The warm lamp made the room look like a small courtroom, except the judge, witness, and defendant were all the people I loved most. I knew I couldn't fight alone. I needed someone outside, someone who knew the law better than I did and wouldn't let feelings blur the lines. The name came to me immediately: Marisol Kane. Marisol had been outside counsel for the museum where I worked for over 3 decades. She specialized in contested gifts, cases where old paperwork could shift millions of dollars. I remembered her clearly tall black hair, a stern gaze with a thread of warmth. We'd teamed up on a tangled case in 2009, and she taught me to read legal clauses like sheet music: keep the tempo, hear the subtext, and don't let anyone play a wrong note. I picked up the phone, found her number in my yellowed notebook. I called, but only got voicemail. "You've reached Marisol Kane, Kane and Torres Law. Please leave a message." I inhaled and kept my voice even. "Hi, Marisol. This is Loretta Myers. I need to speak with you private and urgent. Not museum-related, but it concerns a will. I know you'll understand. Please call me back." I hung up and sat still. In under 15 minutes, the phone buzzed. Her voice was low and steady. "Loretta, are you okay? You sound not quite yourself." "I'm okay, but I need to meet. As soon as possible. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., I'll come to your house." I exhaled. One short answer, and I knew she understood and believed me. The next day, I woke early, made coffee, and set the table. I didn't want the house too tidy. I left a few papers unfolded, a few notebooks open as if it were a casual catch-up, not a strategy session to protect my life. At 10 to 3, a black sedan stopped at the curb. Marisol got out, brisk stride, charcoal wool coat, briefcase in hand. Her eyes were the same cool on the surface, warm underneath. "Miss Loretta," she said with a small smile. "Long time." "Yes," I answered, opening the door. "Last time might have been the Egyptian gallery opening. And now it seems you're the artifact that needs protecting." The half-joke made me laugh. We sat at the dining table. I didn't ramble, just slid the mini recorder and Arthur's original will across to her. Marisol opened her tablet, plugged in earphones, and listened to the entire recording. I stared out the window while my son's voice played warm, slow, each word sweet to the point of false. When the file ended, she took off the earphones and folded her hands. "I understand," she said. "You have audio evidence and the original will. That gives us leverage." "I don't want to fight, Marisol. I just want to keep my autonomy." "And that's exactly what we'll do." She pulled blank forms, a pen, a seal from her case, and spoke like she was reading orders. "First, revoke Spencer's power of attorney. I'll draft it now. Then we'll update the will, naming you as sole executor. Finally, we'll notify the Wisconsin registry about the changes." I nodded, not interrupting. Every word was a rung in the ladder I needed to climb out of the hole Spencer dug. Marisol opened her laptop. Fingers quick, as she explained. "I'll create a dedicated archive on your machine, named Loretta Legal Private. In it, I'll set up versioning and logs. Every edit will have a timestamp, editor, and storage location. No one can alter anything without leaving a trail." I smiled. "Like a chain of custody in the museum." "Exactly. I learned that from you," she said, half teasing. She finished a form and slid it to me. "Revocation of POA for Spencer Hale." I read each line carefully. "I, Loretta Myers, of sound mind, hereby revoke all legal representative authority previously granted to Spencer Hale, effective today." Below was the signature line and notary, Marisol Kane. I took the pen. The tip trembled, but I signed decisively. Marisol flipped the seal and stamped one crisp click. A round red mark bloomed on the page, like the ancient seals I once restored. "Done," she said. "From now on, Spencer has no authority over your property or medical decisions." I sat quiet a moment, feeling an invisible cord loosen from my neck. I only wondered, Can a small stamp stop a storm? Do you think that click was fair to Loretta? I'd truly like to hear your perspective in the comments below. Marisol opened her notebook and continued. We need a 3-layer defense. 3? Legal, medical, financial. She held up 3 fingers. 1. Legal, revoke and reestablish all powers of attorney. Update the will. 2. Medical. Obtain an independent letter of cognitive capacity. 3. Financial, reconcile every account. Ensure documentation for each transaction. With all 3, she said, they can't touch you, not with a single signature. I nodded. Like 3 barriers around a priceless artifact. Exactly. You always catch on fast. She went on, I also want you to set up dual backups, one in encrypted cloud, one on a secure USB. This USB will be sealed and lodged in a bank safe deposit box. I'll help you open a dedicated account. No one else can access it. She handed me a small silver USB engraved K and T. Don't keep it here. Spencer can show up anytime. The metal was cold in my palm. In that moment, for the first time, I wasn't afraid. At 4:30, Marisol closed her laptop and poured more tea. Looking over the rim of her cup, her voice softened. Loretta, from now on, every communication, email, text, paper, needs timestamps and copies. Don't say anything off the record, okay? Understood. I used to do that with donor artifacts. Now I'll apply it to my son. We both laughed, but it only covered a deep sadness. Marisol knew it too. To survive, I had to be an observer, not a mother. Before leaving, she wrote a few final lines, tore the page out, and handed it to me. Next Monday, 10 a.m., bank reconciliation. Bring the will, the POA revocation, and ID. I folded the slip into my wallet. She stood, pulled on her coat. I'll draft the letter to the property registry. They'll have it tomorrow. Stay steady. Everything is moving the right way. Thank you, Marisol. Thank you for trusting me. Not everyone can stand up when the attack comes from family. I watched her go, black hair over her shoulders, stride decisive. When her car turned off the street, the headlights swept the snow and left a streak of light that vanished. The house fell quiet again. I sat and looked at the still wet red seal, small ink, strong enough to block a whole scheme. I wrote one more line in the corner. Second sealing, December 15th. I opened my laptop, created a folder named Legal Revocation, and saved all the scans. In the notes, I typed, POA revocation for Spencer Hale, verified by attorney Marisol Kane. Chain of custody. Intact. Archivist habit. I don't skip details, even the way I annotate. When I finished, I plugged in the USB, copied everything, slipped it into a silver envelope, and heat-sealed it. On the front I wrote, Backup 01 stored evidence, signed Loretta M. The porch light faded. I brewed chamomile tea and watched the window. Snow covered the fence. The sunset washed the block in pale gold, peaceful to the point of absurd. No one knew that in this small house a quiet war was beginning, and the one holding the weapon was a 65-year-old widow, hands unsteady but mind sharp as a blade. I sipped, letting the heat touch my lips. On the table sat Arthur's original will beside the stamped POA revocation. I snapped a photo and whispered, almost under my breath, Arthur, you'd be proud. This time I won't let anyone sign for me. Outside, the wind scraped the bare maples. Inside, I felt warm, the warmth of a woman who stopped trying to be the good mother and started being the keeper of her own keys. 3 days after meeting Marisol, I woke earlier than usual. The snow lay thicker, whitening the neighbors' roofs and the narrow path to the garage. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching morning light bounce off a thin sheet of ice. The heaviness in me was gone. Each plan was stacking neatly, like the archive boxes I used to shelve at the museum. That morning, I called Dr. Hartley Quinn's clinic. He's been my family doctor for nearly 10 years. He treated Arthur in his final years, a man of few words, careful, with a remarkable memory. I kept it brief. Dr. Quinn, I'd like to schedule a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Reason: for my personal records. He was a now. Bit surprised but didn't pry. This Friday, 10 a.m. Do you need me to send a template beforehand? No need. I'm familiar with the process. I heard him chuckle softly over the phone. Still as meticulous as ever. All right, Loretta, I'll have the report ready. And I'll bring in 2 witnesses to sign. When I hung up, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. Not because the fear was gone, but because everything was starting to fall into order, as if I were shelving my own life in an archive. I arrived 10 minutes early for the appointment. The small clinic sat on a quiet street next to a flower shop. Inside, the smell of disinfectant mingled with coffee from the automatic machine at the front desk. I filled out the forms, leaving nothing blank. When I stepped into the room, Dr. Quinn looked up from a file and smiled kindly. I'm guessing Spencer doesn't know about this? No, I said. And I'd like to keep it that way. He nodded immediately, understanding. No further explanation needed. The evaluation lasted nearly an hour and a half. He asked me to recite numbers backward, describe shapes, remember lists of random words, recount recent events. I answered slowly, precisely, without rushing. He moved on to logic tasks and spatial questions. When he asked me to draw a floor plan of my house, I sketched the exact position of each room, window, and even where the afternoon sun falls across the kitchen. Dr. Quinn smiled, nodding along. If anyone says you're impaired, I want to know what they're basing it on. At the end, he signed the evaluation, stamped it, then brought in 2 witnesses from outside the head nurse and the medical secretary. They read the entire conclusion before signing. No evidence of memory loss, disorientation, or diminished capacity. Assessment: alert, full cognition, judgment, and recall stable and appropriate for age. He clipped the papers together and handed them to me. You should keep this safe. This is your first wall, Loretta. I knew what he meant. The first wall was legal proof of capacity. This would block any temporary guardianship filing Spencer might try. Back home, I hung my coat on the hook and set the document bag on the table. Afternoon light slanted through the window and reflected off the wooden surface where I'd already laid out files, recordings, the POA revocation, and the original will. I opened a cabinet and pulled out 2 old document boxes, the kind I used at the museum, and started the familiar work, sorting and indexing. I gathered all receipts, printed emails, bank statements, and my handwritten notes, each one a piece of evidence of consistent conduct. A person losing her mind couldn't store, annotate, and systematize dozens of documents with this kind of logic. I split them into 3 groups: legal, POA, will, notarized papers, letters of confirmation from Marisol, medical, records from Dr. Quinn, prescriptions, test results, the cognitive assessment, personal, letters, receipts, notebooks, work calendars, notes on spending and transactions. I labeled each set with colored tabs: red, blue, yellow. Just like I used to classify wartime artifacts, clear, verifiable, and impossible to scramble. At dusk, I powered up the scanner. Its familiar startup hum thumped steadily like a heartbeat. I scanned everything, assigning each file its own document code and timestamp in date order. 2020 FIV-12-18 MED QN Assessment PDF. 2020 FIV-12-18 Leg POA Revocation PDF. 2025 -12-18 PRS Receipts Batch 1 PDF. I created a descriptive guide with notes, a finding aid for my own life. The scope read, Archival Purpose, to demonstrate the subject Loretta Myers's clarity, logic, and autonomous behavior. When I finished, the screen listed nearly 70 files. I sat and looked at the tidy lines of text, each one a piece of evidence for the fact of my existence, not just as a mother, but as a fully competent legal person. I moved everything into the Loretta Legal Private folder Marisol helped me set up. Then I downloaded Dr. Quinn's digital certificate and attached it to the assessment. The system displayed, Digital Signature Verified, Dr. Hartley, Quinn, MD. I smiled. The monitor's glow reflected off my glasses, glinting like metal on a red seal. Next, I emailed Marisol. Simple subject line. Subject: Cognitive Evaluation Completed Attachment. Certified Assessment. PDF. Message. Attached. Cognitive Exam Report. Certified with witnesses. Backed up in private folder. Proceeding with financial reconciliation. LM. After sending, I added a line to my journal. December 18th completed the second defense layer, medical. That evening, I tidied the desk. The file set sat neatly in clear plastic boxes. I put a large label on the outside, Archive, Loretta Myers, Evidence of Capacity. On the lid, I added with a great Myers. Marker: Each file is a brick in the wall against the image of the forgetful mother. I read it aloud. It sounded like a vow. Around 8, Marisol texted, Received. Excellent, Loretta. I've never had a client archive her own case this thoroughly. I replied, Just habit from the job. Keep that habit. One day, it'll be what saves you. I set the phone down and poured myself a small glass of wine, the kind Arthur liked in winter. The amber color shone clear. I lifted it and spoke into the quiet. This one's for you, Arthur. You always said I had a camera for a memory. Turns out that memory is what's keeping me from being erased. After cleaning up, I walked to the door to check the lock out of old habit. This time, my hand stopped halfway. I smiled and let it fall. No need to check anymore. I turned off the living room lights and left the small desk lamp on. Its warm glow fell across the clear file boxes like the lights in an old exhibit case where artifacts sit safe behind thick glass. Only now, the artifact I was preserving wasn't clay or parchment, it was my own lucidity. I walked down the hall and brushed a finger across our wedding photo. In it, Arthur was smiling, eyes full of trust as he looked at me. Don't worry, I whispered. No one gets to rewrite my story anymore. That night, I slept straight through. No hallway light, no waking to check the lock or the clock. Sleep came soft as an instrumental, and in my dream I sat in a vast archive, boxes lined up around me, each one a guarded memory, each paper a brick in the wall of freedom. After Marisol's congratulatory message that I now had 3 perfect layers of defense, I didn't celebrate. On the contrary, I knew the most dangerous phase is when the other side senses they're losing control. I had a feeling Spencer wouldn't wait long to test me. The next morning, I was up early. Madison's sky was a muted gray, and a chill seeped through the window frames. I pulled a wooden chair onto the front porch, Spencer's usual spot to take calls when he visited. He never discussed private matters inside, always wanting to keep things quiet for Mom. As it turned out, that habit would be the perfect weak point. I opened Arthur's old toolbox and took out a screwdriver, electrical tape, and a mini microphone Marisol had included in the evidence kit. The mic was smaller than a shirt button and could connect to my phone via Bluetooth. I tucked it under the red geranium pot, right at the porch rail where Spencer likes to lean his elbow when he calls. At that angle, the mic was hidden and perfectly placed for clear sound. I checked the signal. The light flashed blue once and went dark. The test came through my earbud. Sparrows, wind over the porch, and even my heartbeat. I smiled. Perfect. I staged a new set of forgetful signs, just enough to lower Spencer's guard, not enough to raise suspicion. On the kitchen table, I left the sugar jar lid open. On the shelf, a notebook tilted with a few dog-eared pages. I didn't turn on the heat, even though it was only in the mid-30s. To outsiders, those details are symptoms, but to me, they're visual traps. At 10 a.m., Spencer arrived, just as I expected. He didn't knock. He eased the door open and called out, "Mom, I'm coming in." I sat at the dining table in a thick sweater, steam curling from my tea. "Oh, Spencer, you're early." "I had an errand nearby and stopped in. Brought you some materials." I glanced at the brown leather folder he placed on the table. The label read, "Silver Pines Care Residence Admissions Info." Just reading it chilled me. He sat across from me, voice calm, like we were discussing summer plans. "Mom, we just want you to be safe. Staff there is on duty 24 hours. Private rooms, a therapy garden, even an art class." I feigned hesitation. "Sounds nice, I guess. But I'm fine, Spencer." "I know, it's just to be prepared. You know you've been a bit forgetful lately." He smiled lightly, voice like a breeze. I knew behind each prepared was a fully drafted guardianship plan. I nodded, picked up the brochure, and acted confused. While I read, he stood, took out his phone, and stepped onto the porch right on cue. I stayed calm, sipped my tea, and opened the recorder app on my phone. The porch mic was already live. The door clicked softly. Then Spencer's voice carried from the porch, each word crisp. "Yes, Rudy, I brought the materials to my mom. Yeah, I think she's slipping. Just look at how she leaves stuff everywhere." A pause. "Right, file the urgent evaluation. If we move fast, we could get a temporary order next week." Each urgent evaluation sliced like a blade. He dropped his voice, strategy mode. "Just cite Wisconsin Statute 742.2, the temporary diminished capacity provision. I'll provide observational evidence." She keeps forgetting the neighbor's name. Missing appointments, that's enough. No need for another exam, just record it." I closed my eyes. My heart beat steady but deep. Every word, capacity, temporary guardianship, observational evidence, scraped like metal on glass. The mic had all of it. He chuckled softly. "Good, Rudy, I trust you. Get the file ready. I'll sign before it goes out." The door opened. Spencer walked back in just as I was still turning the brochure pages. "Who was that, honey?" I asked casually. "Oh, just Rudy, a colleague." "Don't worry, he's good." Sounded important. "No, Mom, just some routine paperwork." He smiled, packed up the folder, and kissed my forehead. "Rest, okay? I'll call you later." The door closed. I heard the engine start and fade. Only quiet remained. I took a long breath and stepped onto the porch. The tiny mic sat snug, behind the geranium pot. I disconnected it, lifted it out, and wiped it with a cloth. Small as it was, it had just captured a conversation worth my entire life. I plugged it into the laptop and downloaded the audio. 17+ minutes, clear enough to hear snow crunch under Spencer's shoes. I replayed it, marked sections, and noted timestamps and keywords. Capacity, 0 hours, 4 minutes, and 11 seconds. Temporary guardianship, 0 hours, 5 minutes, and 27 seconds. Observational evidence, 0006. 43, I saved it as patio call Spencer Rudy Carr, MP3. Then I copied it to the silver USB and uploaded an encrypted version to the cloud around 7 p.m. Marisol arrived with her laptop and a thick file bag. "I got your message. Looks like he just handed us evidence against himself." I nodded. The mic caught everything. She opened the laptop and sampled a few clips. Her face stayed composed, but her eyes flashed. "Perfect. This is the missing piece. We don't need to speak now. Let the records speak." We sat under the warm light. Marisol extracted the file and cross-checked each line with the brochure Spencer brought. She pointed to the fine print under Pre-Admission Evaluation. Capacity assessment may be requested by a temporary guardian. She said quietly, "He wasn't just trying to place you in a facility. He was positioning himself as the legal guardian, with full access to your assets and medical records." I listened, silent. In my mind, I saw Spencer on the porch, voice steady, discussing his mother like an administrative case. Marisol pulled a thick, tabbed packet from her bag, split into 4 color-coded sections. "This is the counterfile. I'm submitting it in person tomorrow with a signed receipt." I reviewed it carefully. 1. POA revocation stamped December 15th. 2. Updated will naming me sole executor, notarized. 3. Dr. Quinn's medical certification original, with 2 witnesses. 4. Notice invalidating all prior documents, including anything Spencer has filed. She said, "I'll deliver it directly to Rudy Carr's office and require his signed acknowledgement." From that moment, any further action on their part will be considered unlawful interference. I nodded, feeling my shoulders lighten. "Marisol, if I didn't have you." "If you didn't have me, you'd still manage," she cut in, smiling. "I'm just helping you speak the right language. The backbone is yours." We listened to the recording one more time. Spencer's last line rang clear, "Get the file ready. I'll sign before it goes out." Marisol hit pause and said, "We'll make that the opening line of our response." Her typing was so fast I could barely keep up. The keys clicked steadily, with wind hissing outside. I watched her hands confident, precise, not a single wasted motion. By close to 10, everything was ready. Marisol sealed the packet in a thick envelope and wrote in bold red, "Deliver by hand, Kane and Torres. Law firm. Attention. Rudy Carr." She stood and put on her coat. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll stand in front of him. And I want to see his face when he realizes it was all recorded." "I don't need to hear what he says," I answered. "I just need him to know I'm still clear." She smiled. "You're more than clear, Loretta. You just built a fortress out of paper and there isn't a wall Spencer can climb." The door shut behind her. I watched the car lights fade into the night. The house went quiet again, leaving only the wind scraping across the porch where that tiny mic had been. I turned off the lights and sat alone. The Silver Pines Care Residence brochure still lay on the table, elderly faces smiling stiffly in printed sunshine. I drew a line through the words, "Feels like home." "Home?" I muttered. "No, Spencer. My real home is here, and you just let it speak for me." I saved one last copy of the audio, attached it to the black patio, call, final file, and set a new password. Then I shut down the computer and looked around the warm, bright room, feeling as if I'd just closed the door on a case. I didn't need to shout or agonize. I let the file speak. And in the world of law and evidence, that's a voice no one can dismiss. 2 days after Marisol filed our response, I woke to a different kind of morning, not because the snow had thinned, but because the house was so quiet I could hear the wall clock counting each beat. It felt like the air after a storm, when you can still smell the electricity. Everything stands still, but you know something is shifting far away. Around 9 a.m., the landline rang. The caller ID read, Marisol Kane. Her voice was low, a little hoarse from lack of sleep. "Loretta, good news. Rudy Carr called me this morning, and he withdrew." I froze, half believing. "Withdrew? You mean he no longer represents Spencer," he said word for word. "I'm stepping away from this matter for personal and ethical reasons." I stayed silent a moment, listening to Marisol shuffle papers. "That's not all," she said. "He sent me an overnight envelope. Inside is a complete copy of everything Spencer's been building for 6 months: draft guardianship petitions, email exchanges, even a template for neighbor observation statements. I'm on my way to bring it to you. When Marisol arrived, I made hot coffee and set out 2 mugs. She didn't smile as usual. She laid the envelope down, eyes turning serious. "This isn't just evidence, Loretta. It's a map of your son's last 6 months." I opened it. The familiar smell of paper and toner rose up. I've handled thousands of historical documents, but no sheet has ever felt this cold. The first page was Spencer's email to Carr. "I'm concerned my mother is showing cognitive issues. She forgets bills and mixes up the neighbor's name. I think we need an independent medical assessment to protect the family assets." I stared at "to protect the family assets," polished, polite, and perfectly ruthless. Next was the draft petition. Under supporting evidence, Spencer listed repetitive behavior, asking the same question in a day, negligence indicators, leaving the door unlocked, forgetting a boiling kettle, neighbor concerns, Mrs. Helen Briggs reportedly saw Loretta wandering around the yard. I lifted a corner of my mouth. Helen Briggs? The 82-year-old who slipped on my front steps and whom I bandaged before calling an ambulance. Now she was a witness. Marisol flipped further. "Look at this part." It was an internal memo from Carr to Spencer suggesting a soft strategy: create a sympathetic image, use the wife, Naomi, as a bridge. Keep every conversation centered on safety, caring for mom, remembering how healthy she used to be. Introduce the concept of long-term care gradually. Avoid the crass term guardianship until the final step. It felt like the room was being slowly drained of air. Those words, I had heard them already. They were Naomi's lines at dinners and quiet afternoons by my side, her voice gentle. "Mom, we just want you safe. Silver Pines has light yoga, a doctor on nights. You won't have to worry about anything." Every phrase, every cadence exactly as drafted here. I looked down at the end where Carr had underlined, "Language must be gentle and familiar, avoiding confrontation. Gradually steer toward the capacity evaluation." I set the paper down, feeling my throat tighten. "Marisol, do you see it? Even the lines that sound caring are a script." "I see it," she said, her voice cold as steel. "And Carr, the man who wrote that script, has just taken himself out of the cast." Inside the envelope was a short, handwritten note from Rudy Carr, the letters slightly shaky, the ink a pale blue. "Mrs. Myers, I know Arthur saved me from losing my job in 1991. He gave me a chance when no one else would. I owe him a debt. When I took this case, I didn't realize the person being evaluated for capacity was his wife. I made a mistake. Please accept this as an apology and as my withdrawal. Enclosed are full copies of the file. I will take no further legal action related to Spencer Hale. Respectfully, Rudy Carr." I finished reading and couldn't speak. Marisol stayed quiet, giving me time to swallow each word. Part of me wanted to be angry, to shout that Carr was just washing his hands because he was losing, but another part understood cracks in a person sometimes only show when the light hits just right. And that light, strangely enough, came from a memory of Arthur. I folded the letter and set it beside the note Arthur had written to me in the will. "Do not grant full authority to our son without an independent evaluation." 2 pieces of paper, 2 men, one who had tried to erase me from my own life, and one who, even gone, happened to shine the truth back into focus. Marisol pulled her laptop closer and drafted a formal warning to Spencer. Her voice was even and firm. "I'll send this by both email and certified mail with return receipt." I glanced at the subject line. Subject: Notice of intent. Potential elder coercion under Wisconsin Statute 46.9. Below was a clear, concise paragraph. Any action, direct or indirect, to reinitiate a guardianship petition or to collect evidence beyond the scope of consent will be treated as elder coercion. All documents have been lodged with the Dane County Court with timestamps. Any further steps will be handled as criminal conduct. Marisol signed and hit send. The ping of a sent message sounded, final as a gavel strike. "Now you just wait," she said. But not the passive kind of waiting. This is active waiting. The file is doing the work for you. I looked at her and nodded slowly. I understand. I'm not afraid of silence anymore. That afternoon, snow fell again. I cleared the table and stacked the documents neatly. In the dim light, Carr's envelope and Arthur's note lay side by side. I didn't know whether to call this a victory or simply justice showing its face, but I knew this. I was steady. Not because of a lawyer's power or any fancy tech, but because I'd stopped believing that being a mother meant swallowing it forever. I opened my notebook and wrote the last line of the day. December 22nd, Attorney Carr withdrew. The file is sealed. The wall is built. I closed the notebook and took a deep breath. The early tremors were gone. What remained was the quiet of someone who knows she has done the right thing. As night came, I stood at the window and watched snow thicken on the neighbors' roofs. The light reflected off the ice in a long, thin streak like a crack across glass. But not every crack is something to fear. Some cracks appear so the light can get through. I whispered, as if to Arthur and to myself, I didn't win, but I stood firm. And that's enough. Passive waiting ended there. From now on, I was no longer the mother waiting to hear, I'm sorry. I was the legal guardian of myself. The next afternoon, with half the snow melted, I was wiping down the old wooden cabinet when I heard the familiar engine outside the gate. No horn, no warning, just a car door slamming, hard and final. I knew at once Spencer. He came into the house without his usual confidence. Coat still on, a folder clamped under his arm, fingers rigid like he was holding something that could break. I recognized that posture. It was exactly how Arthur looked when he signed the last contract of his life, realizing he'd been betrayed by the person he trusted. Mom. His voice was low and rough, stripped of sweetness. I set the cloth down and poured myself a warm mug of spiced apple cider, the scent of cinnamon, mingled with oak from the kitchen, calling up old Christmases. I poured a second mug and slid it toward him. Sit, Spencer. In this cold, have something warm. He stood a few beats, then sat, reluctantly, still hugging the folder. I set the mug before him, then opened the cabinet and brought out 4 packets Marisol had helped me prepare. I placed each one on the table, gently, like laying out exhibits at trial. 1. Revocation of POA notarized. 2. Updated will, naming me as sole executor. 3. Capacity certification signed by Dr. Hartley Quinn with 2 witnesses. 4. Affidavit confirming all filings made and verified. I didn't circle around it. Spencer, I know what you want to ask. Before you speak, you need to understand, everything you see here is my lawful decision. No one can replace it. He looked down at the packets and stayed quiet. His shoulders locked. His eyes scanned the room, as if searching for signs of who helped me, Naomi, Marisol, someone. But I sat still, fingers laced, calm. Mom. His voice rasped, like he meant to argue, then stalled. I met my son's eyes. Spencer, I know what you're thinking. You believe someone put me up to this, don't you? But you're forgetting something. Before I was your mother, I was a keeper of evidence. My work is to keep the truth intact, no matter who tries to edit it. This time, I'm just doing my job. The air in the room was thick, and still enough to hear the clock. He glanced down the hall, toward the kitchen, toward the corner where I keep my notebook. Maybe he was hunting for the other hand at play, but there was nothing except what I had carefully arranged. Mom, Don't lie anymore, I cut in, soft but firm. I'm not angry, I'm just tired of your performance. He frowned. You think I'm performing? I lifted the mug and turned it slightly. If you weren't, why was there a draft ready? Why does the word concerns in your email match Naomi's phrasing word for word? Why would someone I taught to write his name first now try to sign away my rights? He didn't answer. His eyes dropped to the floorboards. His hand shook a little on the folder. Mom, he said quietly, I thought I was protecting you. I smiled sadly. Protecting me by locking me up? A long silence stretched. I let it. Sometimes silence is the clearest mirror. I spoke again, steady as if reading a record. My silence these past months wasn't weakness, Spencer. It was observation. I listened, recorded, and kept it all. And I understand this. When someone fears losing control, they'll turn another person into the one who's incompetent just to feel safe. He looked up, lips parting to object, but my eyes held him. I poured a little more cider and nudged the mug toward him again. You're still my son, but I won't sign anything else with your name on the representative line. From today on, every decision house, accounts, medical files will bear my signature. I slid Dr. Quinn's certification closer. The doctor confirms I am fully competent. You can call him. He'll tell you exactly this. She remembers the small stories of her life better than I remember my prescriptions. He looked at the signature and seal, then back at me. Did you do all this just to beat me? No, I said, gently. I did it to stand firm. Spencer didn't respond. He opened his folder and took out a few papers, old copies, probably a half-drafted guardianship petition. He flipped for a while, then closed it. His hand dropped, eyes landing on the cover of the new will. Mom, I don't know what Naomi has told you. But I raised a hand, stopping him. It wasn't Naomi. I found it myself. You were tracking me? No. You left a trail. I said it without malice, simply as a fact. He knew I wasn't lying. After a long moment, Spencer stood, no slamming, no shouting, no argument. He folded the folder he'd brought and set it back on the table right beside the revoked POA. He didn't crease it, didn't tear it, didn't throw it. He just left it there. I didn't stop him. We looked at each other one last time, the look of two people who once shared blood, now quietly admitting that something between them had broken. He turned away. When the door opened, cold air rushed in, carrying snow and the sound of footsteps fading. I stayed where I was. The cider steamed in front of me. I reached over and switched off the tiny recorder hidden under the ashtray. The red light went dark. On the screen, an autosave flashed. Conversation clean copy. I replayed the ending to confirm it had all been captured. My voice was calm, clear, never above what was needed. Spencer's voice, when it fell silent, sounded like the gap between two breaths. I saved the file under Confrontation Final, then got up, cleared the mugs, and boxed. The papers. That night, the snow quit. I sat by the window, looking out at the porch where the mic had once been the stage for scheming and for conversations. Only the wind moved the geranium pots now. I turned off every light but the one in my study. In a hazy dream, I saw myself in a bright room, boxes neatly labeled, ledgers clean, windows open, no shadows in the hall, no breath on my neck. Just me sitting in that room, one hand on the will, and a simple, deep feeling spreading. The right to decide had returned to its owner, and for me, that was enough. A week after that final conversation with Spencer, my house settled into a new rhythm, no longer strung tight, not quite peaceful yet. In that in-between, someone new arrived, carrying youthful breath and the precision of the digital age. Her name was Ava Kane, Marisol's niece, a senior in information and archival science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Marisol called me on Monday morning, her voice light, like he was suggesting something simple. "Miss Loretta, my niece wants a winter practicum. She studies archives, and you've got a data trove that needs security and order. Win-win." I laughed. "You rang the right bell. I've lived my whole life among files and seals." "Perfect. Let her stay a few weeks. She'll help you and learn what the textbooks don't teach." That afternoon, Ava arrived. A slim girl with dark brown hair, round glasses, a gray puffer coat. She carried 2 laptop bags and a small box labeled "External Drives Confidential." Her eyes were bright, a little shy, but her voice was sure. "I'm Ava. Thank you for letting me stay. Aunt Marisol said to call you Mrs. Myers, but if it's okay, I'd rather say Miss Loretta." I smiled. "Just Loretta. No formalities here." From the day Ava moved into the upstairs room, the house changed its breathing. Mornings, instead of the old radio, I heard keyboard taps from the study. She set up university-grade security, 3 layers of encryption, a local server, and a standardized naming convention for everything. I sat nearby, watching and warming inside like seeing a first student carefully label boxes in a museum. Ava tilted her head and asked, "Should I use ISO convention or keep it short like you do?" For example, 2025 Case Myers, Evidence 1. PDF or Myers Ev 1. "Use ISO," I said. "Dates are the quiet proof of continuity. Order doesn't lie." She grinned. "I love how you put that, order doesn't lie. I might borrow it for my paper." I didn't answer, just smiled. In her voice I heard energy. I'd lost a belief that if things are put in the right place, the world can be kinder. By noon, Ava had reset the desk, added 2 large monitors, and docked the drives. She printed colored labels for albums, legal, medical, personal, media evidence. Each folder carried a changelog, a small sheet noting who edited, when, and why. "Loretta," she asked, "may I digitize your paper notebooks?" "I won't change anything, just scan to searchable PDFs." I looked up and thought a beat. "Do it, but keep the originals. Real memory has its own smell. You can't compress that." Ava nodded hard. "At school they teach that the physics of paper is part of the context." "I like how you say it. Real memory has its own smell." In the afternoon, the scanner's hum and keystrokes blended into an easy rhythm, like background music for a house that had known only the clock for too long. When Ava printed labels, the little printer's cadence reminded me of Arthur's old typewriter in the 1980s when he wrote his thesis. I watched her small hands fly and suddenly saw Arthur's shape double-exposed him by the window, typing with all 10 fingers, murmuring lines about history and time. For a moment I realized what I lost had returned in a different form. At dinner, Ava ate with me at the kitchen table. I made potato stew. She brought garlic, toast. Midway through, the house phone rang. Spencer Hale lit up on the screen. I watched it glow and said nothing. Ava paused, spoon in midair. "Do you want me to—" "No, let it ring." The tone stretched and died. A moment later, voicemail blinked. I didn't press play. I didn't need to. "Aunt Marisol says," Ava murmured, "when someone tries to control your story, the best thing is not to react too fast." "She's right," I said. Silence is an answer, too. The next day, Ava pulled me out to the garage. I hadn't stepped there in years-old boxes, Arthur's things, keepsakes, letters gone yellow. "I want to label them. Every box deserves a name," she said, excited. "Not afraid of dust?" "Dust is evidence, too, Miss Loretta." We both laughed. 2 women, 2 generations, sat amid old wood smells and a bald bulb's weak light. Ava wrote labels. Arthur's research, family letters, travel 1989. She asked every detail: what paper Arthur liked, what ink, how he filed. I told her, my voice lighter without my knowing. He always used pale blue ink. Said darker ink hid the sadness in the words. That's sad and beautiful, Ava whispered, eyes bright. By dusk, the garage was less chaotic. The boxes now had names and stood in straight rows. Ava dusted her hands and smiled. See? When things are called by their real names, they line up on their own. And when a person's heart is called by its real name, I said softly, it settles too. That night the house wasn't as still. The rhythm of Ava's typing upstairs mixed with page turns and the wind brushing the window. Each small sound made the house feel like it was breathing again. In the kitchen, a tea stain dried on the table. Once I would have wiped it at once. Now I left it. On the floor, a few label scraps waited to be swept. The house wasn't pristine, but it was alive. Ava sat on the stairs and smiled. You know, I read a journal line you wrote years ago. The house is as quiet as a museum. Now I think your museum has visitors. I laughed, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel forced. Before bed, I opened my journal. A fresh page, the paper scented faintly of pine. I used blue ink, the color Arthur loved. December 29th. Ava arrived. The house isn't still anymore. Neither am I. There's the sound of keys, the scent of tea, motes of dust floating in the light. Someone asks my opinion about naming rules. Someone laughs between the whir of a fan. And I realize living isn't just guarding files from deletion. Living is leaving fingerprints on the table, the cup, the paper to prove we touched this life. I set the pen down and closed the journal. Light from Ava's room spilled under her door. The steady tapping sounded like Arthur's typewriter played by different hands in a different age. I whispered almost a prayer. Thank you, Ava. And thank you, Arthur, because of you. I'm still learning how to go on. The house rested in warm light, a little noisy, a little messy, full of human presence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was guarding an archive. I was living in it where every document, voice, and breath blended into the only evidence that matters. I'm still here. Thursday morning, my phone chimed. A text from Naomi, the daughter-in-law, who once said sweetly, "You just need to rest." Mom, I'm sorry for everything. I just want to talk once, to clear the misunderstandings. We truly only wanted what's best for you. I read it over and over, feeling equal parts irony and sadness. What's best? The phrase people use when they're trying to control someone. But I didn't refuse. I knew I needed to see them not for revenge but for closure. I replied briefly. 3 p.m., the old diner on Maple Street. They have cameras. My treat. That diner was where I took Spencer whenever he scraped a knee or failed at school. We used to sit at the second booth by the window. I'd order him toast and vanilla ice cream. Now, I chose it again as a reminder. No past is erased. People just try to forget. At 2:50, I arrived first and took the old seat. The window still had a frosted film, sunlight sliding across the table in a bright stripe. I ordered black coffee and rested my hand on my purse inside, a USB drive and a copy of the old pledge. When Naomi came in, she wore a light knit coat, hair pulled back, worry flickering in her eyes beneath a practiced smile. Mom. Sit down, Naomi. Spencer followed, silent. He didn't look at me, just pulled out a chair. No one ordered more. Time in the diner seemed to stall. Naomi started, voice soft, trying for honest. Mom, really, we just wanted to make sure everything was safe. You live alone. Your health is unstable. We were afraid if something happened. I cut in not sharply, just tilted my head slightly. Safe for whom? Naomi? For me? Or for my retirement account? She flinched, then quickly regained her composure. No, it's not like that. It's just, Rudy Carr said, if we finish the paperwork early, then. She stopped mid-sentence. I saw Spencer's shoulders tense, but Naomi had already slipped. Then what? I asked slowly. Then, there would be support from the Elder Care Fund. A portion of the fees is reimbursed if the person under guardianship has personal assets. The words dropped like a stone. I didn't need any more proof. A bonus for finishing early, that's what they called, stripping a living, lucid person of her autonomy. I didn't react. I didn't slam the table or shed a tear. I just looked at them as if they were two figures in a case file I'd just closed. Thank you for telling the truth, I said evenly. I think that's enough for today. I picked up my wallet, left money for the bill, and stood. Naomi reached for my hand, but I stepped. Back half a pace, gentle, final. Don't call this filial piety. You can't claim to love someone while drafting a plan to take their rights. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. Chairs scraped behind me, but I didn't stop. Outside, the cold wind slapped my face, the kind of cold that wakes you up. That evening, I told Marisol everything. She listened in silence, eyes far away, then said, Miss Loretta, I think we should give them a chance to stop. If they'll apologize and end every legal move, we won't sue. Because in the end, your goal isn't to win. I nodded. Right. The goal is to live in peace in my own home. Marisol drafted a settlement proposal. If Spencer and Naomi sign a commitment to cease all guardianship efforts, apologize in writing, and refrain from any future financial interference, you will not file suit. We'll lodge the minutes with the court for the record, but not publicly. 3 days later, Carr sent a letter. Not from Spencer, from him, the former attorney. Mrs. Myers, I hereby terminate all representation of Spencer Hale and Naomi Hale. I have advised them to withdraw and accept reconciliation. I ask that you consider closing this matter with the generosity I once saw in your husband. I read the letter, set it on the table, and felt a strange lightness, like when an old door falls shut after a gust of wind. That afternoon, the settlement meeting took place in Marisol's small office. The room was bright, simple, with cream-colored walls. Naomi sat across from me, eyes red, silent. Spencer beside her, hands clenched, looking tired. Marisol read each clause aloud, clear and precise. Clause 3. The respondents commit not to initiate or assist in any legal, financial, or medical action related to Mrs. Loretta Myers' representation without her written consent. I looked at Spencer. He kept his head down, said nothing. Final clause, Marisol continued. The respondents acknowledge overreach, commit to respecting Mrs. Myers' personal decisions, and sign to confirm. Pens touched paper. The sound was small, but it rang in me like a closing cadence. Naomi signed first, then Spencer. He glanced up for a moment, ready to speak, but my gaze kept him quiet. No anger left, just fatigue with a trace of pity. I understood. Fear of loss, of lack, of not being loved, had driven them to cruelty. I signed last, lightly, decisively. Done, Marisol said, closing the file and stamping the confirmation. Naomi stood, bowed her head, and murmured, I'm sorry, Mom. I answered, I heard you. No hug, no tears, only silence, the kind with no resentment and no expectation. That evening I went home. Ava was labeling the last boxes in the garage. She looked up and smiled. All done, ma'am? Everything okay? I smiled, set my bag down. Okay. The file is closed. I went upstairs to my study and opened the safe. I changed the code 3. New numbers with no link to anyone's birthday. I took out the new will and added one final line under the executor. Executor, Dane County Women's Scholarship Fund, designated by Loretta Myers. I didn't want my estate to become a tool for fights. I wanted it to become opportunity for girls like I once was caught between a dream and a duty. When I finished, I sealed it, signed, and dated it. January 14th. Final revision. No further amendments. I closed the safe, sat down, and breathed slowly. No sense of triumph, no glee, just the quiet of someone who has restored her right to be left in peace. Ava brought up 2 cups of tea, faint orange blossom drifting in the air. "Ma'am, is it really over now?" "Yes. And the funny thing is, it didn't end with shouting, it ended with signatures." She smiled, setting the cup beside me. "A peaceful ending is also a win, Miss Loretta." I looked at the tea, steam fogging faintly, and said softly, "Maybe. But what I value more than winning is that I no longer have to prove I have a good memory. I just need to live as someone who deserves to be trusted." Ava nodded. Outside, the early spring wind brushed the maples by the porch. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a fortress, it felt like a home. I opened my notebook and wrote the day's last line. Let them speak first, then watch the truth stand up on its own. When I finished, I dotted the pen and closed the book. It felt like completing a dossier kept for a lifetime, nothing left to add, nothing left to hide. At noon, Ava tapped on the door, face bright, eyes a little pink. "Ma'am, I just got an email from school. They approved my thesis on preserving personal archives in private families. I'm going to use your system as a case study." I laughed and pulled her into a long hug. "Good, Ava. This house may be small, but it holds more than you think." She smiled softly. "When this term ends, I'll come back to finish the finding aid for the Myers family collection. I promise. I'll be waiting." I watched her pack up the laptop, folding each cable carefully. The room went quiet, but it was the kind of quiet with a heartbeat. I knew part of my story had traveled beyond these walls into books, classrooms, and maybe into the life of someone who's never met me. Toward evening, I opened the safe and took out 2 envelopes. One was the letter from Rudy Carr, the man who nearly turned me into a case, but withdrew in silence. The other was Arthur's handwritten note, the ink still faintly blue. "If the day comes when our son makes you doubt yourself, remember you see more clearly than you believe." I set them side by side, tied them with an old ribbon, and placed them in a wooden box. I whispered, 2 lessons, one about people, one about light. Then I locked the box and set it on the highest shelf, not to hide it, but to remind myself that once truth is lit, it doesn't need guarding. That night, I did something many would find hard. I invited Spencer to dinner. I didn't text Naomi. I sent my son a single line. "I'm cooking your favorite. If you're free, come by tonight." He arrived late, carrying a cheap bottle of wine, not saying much. I greeted him with a gentle smile. On the table, I had set 2 clean silver spoons, bright and polished. No mention of the past, no court, no agreements. I just poured warm apple cider and told a small story. Once you asked why I worked at the museum. I said because I don't want the truth forgotten. Now I understand something else. Sometimes truth needs forgiveness to rest. Spencer was quiet. He stared into his cup, hand tightening and loosening. I didn't need an apology. That silence was enough. We ate and talked about the weather, about the new neighbors. Dinner passed slowly, lightly, without bitterness. At the door, before he left, Spencer said softly, "Thank you for still letting me into the house." I answered, breath light. "This door was never locked, Spencer. I just needed time to hold the key." He nodded, said nothing more. When his car slipped past the maples, I closed the door not to shut him out, but to keep the night wind from coming in. I sat at the table and poured another cup of tea. The porch light shimmered through the window, steady and warm. Inside me was a quiet unlike those first days, not silence from fear, but the peace of someone who has said her piece. I thought of them all, Arthur, Carr, Marisol, Ava, and Spencer. each one a tile in the larger mosaic, the one I once feared would never be complete. Now I knew it was never missing anything, it just needed time for me to see it clearly. I opened my journal one last time and wrote a few final lines. If someone has ever made you doubt yourself, remember that dignity doesn't need permission. If they call you weak, let time show you were simply preparing to stand steadier. And if you ever feel alone, remember truth has its own strength, and it will rise when it's time. I set down the pen and closed the book, the spine clicking softly, a small, decisive sound, like the final seal in a registrar's life. Outside, the sky was turning pale blue. Ava texted from campus, "Ma'am, when I submit the thesis, I'll write, 'Dedicated to Loretta Myers, who taught me that order is not silence.'" I laughed out loud, my heart light as a freshly signed page. I turned off the light, opened the window, and let the night air in, listening to the soft hum of insects in the yard. Life has never been easy, but at least now I'm living it my way in my house, with my memories, and even with the mistakes I've forgiven. And if you've listened this far, maybe you know that feeling too when someone doubts you, belittles your voice, or makes you wonder if you're still trustworthy. I just want to tell you, dignity needs no permission. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's enough to stand up and guard your small truth, and the light will be enough to fill the room. If this story touched you, let me know which city you're listening from. Every comment reminds me I'm not alone. Thank you for staying to the end, and if you'd like, please like, subscribe, or catch the next story. I'll be here with you on quiet evenings just like this.